Welcome to the June 25th, 2020 electronic meeting of the Environmental Commission.
Hello.
This meeting is in accordance with executive orders from the governor to affect social distancing and mitigate the spread of the
Yeah, I know. I saw you coming in and out. I'm not sure exactly what to do. 1 second.
We're not muted.
COVID-19 virus. We intend to conduct this meeting similarly to an in-person meeting. However, please be patient if there are technical issues. Public comment will be via telephone only. To speak during any of the public comment opportunities, please call 1-888-788-0099 and enter meeting ID number 924-5796-9823. This information is also available on the published agenda in the public notices section of the city website, and on the broadcast of this meeting on CTN channel 16, AT&T channel 99, and online at www.a2gov.org/watchctn. So let's proceed to the roll call.
All right. So Chair Brown.
Present.
Councilmember Bannister is here, although she's having some audio problems. Councilmember Smith.
Present.
Commissioner Kellawart.
Here.
Commissioner Needham.
Here.
Commissioner Slavic.
Here.
Commissioner Mirsky.
Here.
Commissioner Overbeck. Okay, he's there. Awesome. Commissioner Skinner. I think she is absent. Commissioner Graham.
I'm here.
Commissioner Gibrandal.
Here.
Commissioner Appel. Not yet. Okay. And Commissioner Mitchell.
Here.
You have a quorum.
All right, thank you. We have a new member. Since we last met, Rita Mitchell has been appointed by council to join the commission. So Rita, would you introduce yourself and say something about yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Steve. First off, I appreciate joining this group. I think it's going to be an opportunity that I hope I can be a strong partner of all of you. So my background starts really early, and I won't go into super detail, but I grew up in Michigan, and I lived for only 5 years of my life outside of Michigan in the state of Maine. And I've always been involved with the outdoors from the time my family brought up and to now. I have been active in community things, and I think that my activity in the community has been one of longstanding that even started at a young age when my mother worked in the state capital of Michigan, and I occasionally served as her page running errands around that building. It was quite interesting. When I get active in various things, it's almost always with an environmental background reason. And that is one of the things that strongly motivates me, from working as one of the many volunteers in the state with Voters Not Politicians to right now being among many voices that are working to shut down Line 5 in the state. So I just wanted to let you know that little bit about me. My professional background is as a health policy analyst. I have a master's in public health, as well as a master's in speech pathology that came earlier. So that's my background. I welcome getting to know all of you as well and working together. Thanks.
Great. Yeah, thank you, Rita. And so the next item on the agenda is the approval of the agenda. Let's see, the floor is open for discussion.
I move to approve the agenda.
Second.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Okay. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Or give me the thumbs up. Okay. Any opposed? Okay, the agenda passes unanimously. The next item on the agenda is the approval of the minutes. Our last meeting was on February 27th. I hope you all have had a chance to look over the minutes from that meeting and suggest any corrections. So is there any discussion, or is there a motion to approve the minutes from the February 27th meeting? Okay, I see no desire for discussion. So do we have a motion?
Move to
Jim
approve.
Smith, do
Second.
I have a second?
Second.
Okay, John Mursky seconds that. And all in favor of approving the minutes from the February 27th meeting, raise your hands. Okay, all opposed? The motion passes unanimously. So the next item on the agenda is public commentary. I'm going to read a brief statement, and then we will open the phone lines for public commentary. This is an opportunity for persons to speak up for 3 minutes. Please call 1-888-788-0099 and enter meeting ID number 924-5796-9823. This information is also displayed on the meeting agenda and video feed. City staff will select callers that have raised their hand one by one using the last 3 digits of your phone number. In order to electronically raise your hand to indicate your desire to speak, please press *9 on your phone. You will hear an automated announcement that the host is allowing you to speak. When speaking, please move to a quiet area and mute any television or background sounds so that we may hear you clearly. Please state your name and address at the beginning of your comments. Please be patient. There is a delay of up to 30 seconds before the connection is established. Do we have anybody requesting public comment?
We do not at this time, although we're supposed to give them 30 seconds to dial in.
Okay. Well, we'll wait 30 seconds now. And just to remind everybody that we will have a second opportunity for public comment in this meeting, closer to the end of the meeting. Do we have anybody calling in, Emily? Okay.
Not that I see.
All right. So there are no requests for public comment, so we'll proceed to the next item of the agenda is unfinished business. The first item here is the 820 update from Dr. Missy Stoltz. Missy, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Chair Brown, and thank you all for creating space in the agenda to talk a little bit about where we are with 820 and opportunities for collaboration. I'm going to try to share my screen if I can. Emily, can you make me a co-host?
I'm sorry?
I think you need to make me a co-host so I can share my screen if possible.
There you go.
Great, thank you. Excellent. So first and foremost, I want to thank you all for the incredible leadership and support, thoughts, time, effort, energy that you've put into 820 to this date, and that I know you're going to continue to contribute as we go forward. Most importantly, what we've built is living, as you all know, but it wouldn't have been possible without you. And so I want to do I want to start this by grounding it in a thanks to you, to each and every one of you for everything you've given. I don't think there is a single one of you that we haven't engaged with, some very, very deeply as technical advisors, others really as advocates and proponents for this work, others as thought partners. So thank you all so very much for everything you've contributed to this work. Going forward, what I was asked to do by Commissioner Brown was to kind of reground us. We're in a different moment. The plan is passed, and now we're in a hard pivot into implementation. And so the question was, where are some opportunities for the Environmental Commission to support 820 kind of in a more targeted way? So what I've done is just kind of broken down the slides, thought about your structures, and I have some proposals. These are just that, proposals, and I think it's worth kind of revisiting and talking about them. And to ground the conversation, as a reminder, you are one of the really critical advisory committees that we have in the city. You are an advisory committee to council, to the city administrator, and certainly to staff. And so the advice and expertise that you have is important, but it is important to distinguish that we are not asking any of you to be staff, right? And so there is a line here. And so advice and support is needed, but it is not do the work. And so I want to be very clear about that. We have had discussions in the past about that line. And I think it's important to ground the conversation with the role of the Environmental Commission per the bylaws that were created. So we don't want to ask too much of you, but we will ask as much as we can get from you. So our ideas coming forward, I took your existing structure. So I thought about this in 5 ways. You've got the entire body, all of you together, and then some of you donate even more time to special working groups. And so the 4 working groups we've traditionally had are solid waste, natural features, water, and the pollinators group. So what I did then is went through each of them and started to identify opportunities for supporting A20 implementation. So here's what you see across the board. Opportunity, they're in no particular order, but if this is not just about A20, the document, if you've read it, it's also about things that you might find in the governance documentation or things that you might find in the prioritization framework that supports this. So one of the very first opportunities that we see, this isn't explicit in A20, it's implicit, and that is we want to work on developing what we call an opportunity assessment, an A20 opportunity assessment for different segments of the population. When I talk about this with the public, we basically want to make this very easy for everyone to kind of do the next right thing, stealing from Frozen 2, so that people can access and make good choices that are helping them have healthier, safer homes, but also helping them make progress towards A20. But we know that not everyone is going to come at A20 from the same place. And so one opportunity is to work in collaboration with staff and the Energy Commission and other commissions to figure out what would an opportunity assessment holistically look like for homeowners, for renters, for businesses, and make sure that all of the different perspectives from stormwater management to energy reduction to renewable energies, just other distributed generation technologies, to growing your own local food, to interacting with your neighbors and increasing resilience. What does that kind of look like as a full package? And I want to thank and give a special shout out to Commissioner Mirsky, who has thought a lot about this with us, especially from the energy perspective. But now it's time to really make it bigger and to start piecing together the various areas of expertise that we have. So that's one idea. The second idea, and again, this is a full commission sort of scoping for the first round. The second is in our governance document, we are planning to do an annual A20 summit. And this is an opportunity for us to reflect on the work that has happened so far, to celebrate successes and individuals who've been instrumental in helping those successes become manifest, and to really think about and start planning for the next year of action, where we sort of laser focused. Now, in the Environmental Commission's bylaws, there is a State of the City environmental report, and I think it might be an opportunity here to merge those, where we have some sort of written report, but we also have a celebration, and it would be wonderful from our perspective to be able to collaborate on that. The third, this is explicitly in your bylaws, but it's relevant to lots and lots of things in A20, and it's helping keep track of, support, demonstrate your support for, elevate to council issues of state and federal policy that are relevant or impediments to the work that we're trying to do around carbon neutrality, sustainability, and environmental protection. And again, this one is already done, but I think we're going to need to be paying attention to a lot more things than what we have historically had the capacity to do. We are also working on an A20 ambassadors program. This is actually pretty far down the thought inception. You might see in the A20 plan, we have a youth ambassador and a neighborhood ambassador program. We've decided to merge these, and we'll have a special track for our youth leaders. We've been running a youth summit all week in partnership with youth leaders. They've mostly been leading that, and we've been supporting them this week. And we're hoping to bring them into the actual planning and design, but it would be great to have the Environmental Commission also support the creation of this kind of ambassador program. Think in terms of output, these are individuals who can go out into the community and really talk to their neighbors and be kind of champions or extensions of the work that we're all trying to do, so we scale fast and we reach lots of different people with lots of trusted advisors. And then one of the other things in our governance document is that every year we're going to run an A20 survey, and it will always be important to have input into that survey and help advertising it. But input is critical now, because this will be the first year that we run that survey. And of course, we want that survey to be consistent over time so we can have demonstrative changes in perceptions, in activities, you name it. So this year in particular, we're going to need some, it's a heavier lift to get that survey together. And it would be wonderful to have, if nothing else, the commission as a thought partner in that exercise. And I'm even happy to start that exercise today. So these are some of the opportunities that we saw for kind of the full commission in normal course of business, where we can come back and have some dialogue and interaction. Going to the specific work groups then, thinking about the solid waste work group, well, we have an entire strategy that's focused on solid waste. So these are just some of the actions that are in there. Things like continuing to support the movement, and I know Eileen is with us, towards year-round composting, helping to engage and educate residents about composting. It's one thing to have it, it's another to actually use it when it's available. We also have efforts to expand commercial recycling in A20, so helping us think about how that may play out and really kind of supporting staff in developing that strategy. And then we're talking about a refrigerant recycling program. It is not something that most people think about. Refrigerants are the most potent greenhouse gas, so very, very little has a very significant impact. So anything we can do to get those refrigerants into the proper place and out of our atmosphere or in our waste stream has a really significant impact. And there's been some really great work that's happened in peer communities. And it would be great to have some kind of thought partners to figure out what are we doing in this space as well. For the natural features work group, what you'll see in A20 is support for sure and enhancement of our local tree canopy. So how are we maintaining what we have? How are we enhancing what we have? How are we helping homeowners, residents, private enterprises maintain and nurture their urban tree landscape? It's also thinking about, we've been talking a lot with our partners in the land preservation work and thinking about, in this moment in time, we have a lot of aging farmers, and we have a pretty white community that farms. How are we supporting the next generation of farmers? And explicitly, how are we bringing Black and Brown and Indigenous populations into farming? And how are we supporting women in coming into that industry? And so I actually see a space to have some of this conversation, which may feel somewhat removed, but I actually think the natural features work group, if that was of interest, could really help us think about this holistic strategy and perhaps think a little bit outside the box and how we nurture more people coming into the farming landscape, especially thinking about organic farming in particular in our region. Plant first diets are also in A20, and I think there's space here as we're thinking about natural systems and preserving them, the relationship with what we grow, how we grow it, what kind of ecosystem services our food actually provides and serves, how we harvest, when we harvest, et cetera. So I think there could be some work around growing your own local food as well as focusing on plant first diets if that were of interest. And then another thing that I won't say we, I will say that I personally am really interested is thinking about the right-of-way, and we've had a number of conversations with people. The right-of-way is the space between the sidewalk and the curb, and how we more effectively use that to advance a lot of our sustainability goals. So we have height limitations. There's a lot of really important things that we have to remember about the right-of-way, but I also think it's really underutilized, and we might be able to come up with a pretty creative strategy for how we could have different options to really activate that space to advance our sustainability goals. So those are just some ideas. For the water work group, really thinking about, Jen Lawson's with us. She does a fabulous job with our green infrastructure. But one of the things we talk a lot about is once we have green infrastructure, the story's not done. We have to maintain that infrastructure. We also want to encourage more private residences to get the right kind of green infrastructure and teach them how to maintain that infrastructure. So I think there's a whole bunch of opportunity here, especially targeting our underrepresented neighborhoods and our low-income neighborhoods, areas where we have high flooding risk already. And then, of course, a lot of work to be done in terms of enhancing water conservation efforts throughout our community, especially in terms of the users themselves, making sure they have the tools, the resources, the knowledge, especially as we get into the summer season, we tend to have higher water consumption. So what can we do to make sure to help lower both consumption, but to be far more efficient in what it is that we do consume? And then lastly, for the pollinators working group, this is going to look really familiar to the natural features working group. In fact, it's going to look explicitly the same as the natural features working group because I think the opportunities sort of fall in that same landscape. So I'm not going to reiterate them here. Sorry if you're seeing all the pop-ups. We have a guest speaker tonight that's also taking place, and you're seeing people talk about that. So the idea, thinking through this as I was kind of going, it was a thought exercise. And what occurred to me is that there's a natural melding. For some of these work groups, it was far easier to identify really, really significant fits with A20, and for others, it was harder. And so the proposal that we had, and I know there's a lot of discussion that's been happening about this, is thinking about different roles and responsibilities for commissioners. I started my service in Ann Arbor as an environmental commissioner. I've been on the Environmental Commission, I was on PAC, and then I was on the Transportation Commission. And I will say, expectations for commissioners vary. I, at one point in my time, had a lot of time to give to a city commission. At many other points in my time, I did not. And I don't want to exclude people from service in terms of our commissions, because the time that we get from you, even if it's just on meetings and maybe one more hour, is really important to this work. And so I want to acknowledge that we have disproportionate abilities even within this group to contribute to the work around environmental protection and climate action in the city. So I struggled thinking about whether it was better to have lots of individual working groups or it was better to have a few working groups that did a handful of things really, really well. And so the proposal that I came up with, which is just that, a proposal, was to continue to have the full commission and the laser focus on solid waste and natural systems with the blending of the pollinators group into that. Water work group, I'm open for discussion. We have lost one of our main champions with the stepping down of Susan Hutton. And so I'm just not sure how much enthusiasm and energy there was for that to continue. So completely open for discussion, but why not have one provocative slide to get us into that dialogue? So those are just ideas that we have. We're open for other ways to support A20, but again, the charge here was to really think about how the commission could support as we pivot into implementation of A20. So that's the focus. And then remembering that the roles and responsibilities for the commission really are to provide advice and general support for staff. And so I wanted to respect that and respect the different amounts of time and energy people are able to contribute to the commission. So with that, I will stop.
All right, well, thank you, Missy. I will open this to discussion. One thing I've noticed is when the shared screen is on, I can't see everybody's. So it's good that the shared screen went away. Does anybody wish to make a comment at this point or ask Missy any questions? Peck.
Yeah, thank you, Missy. That was an excellent and concise presentation. And it was provocative, which is good. I'm wondering if our commission should talk about going through each one of her points. Obviously, we should first think if there are other areas and discuss that with Missy, but it would be interesting to go through each one of her recommendations where areas we might be able to do something and might not, and just see what happens. In other words, try and push the envelope with Missy and any staff that are interested to expand the scope of what we might be able to do to help. I'm not sure if that's the best way to approach it or not, but there were quite a few ideas that you just gave us.
Anybody else? Chris Graham?
Missy, you've become actually quite famous around the country for your A20 climate action plan, and you deserve to be. You're really quite a brilliant person and have devised a set of goals that are really extraordinary. I don't know how to get it so it reads better.
Lower. Can you go a little lower? Nature's Best Hope.
There you go. This is the second book in a series of two, one of which I gave you when I met with you a year and a half ago, about not just protecting the canopy of trees in Ann Arbor, but greatly expanding it, and doing so with an eye toward native trees that have a great deal more environmental and ecological value than ornamentals, which of course I've been giving my clients for years. This book suggests that we really need to, across the country, replace turfgrass with native species, not just trees, but the whole bailiwick of our local ecosystem, which was in many ways a savanna. I didn't see these things in your plan, and maybe you think, maybe your calculation is that reducing carbon emissions is the primary game. I'm not sure I agree with that. I think restoring the native ecosystems on a widespread basis may be the primary game, or at least an equal one. And this comes from a guy who's spent 40 years planting gardens for people with many ornamentals that aren't native. because they're beautiful. A lot of them pollinators like, but as Doug Tallamy says, it's not pollinators, it's caterpillars. And most insects have a specific plant or a very small range of plants that they will make eggs on and feed on and make caterpillars. And that's from whence pollinators come. And I'm going through quite a sea change in my point of view, much more so since I met with you a year and a half ago. And I would very much like to chat further with you about this on our local basis, on back channels, and as leader of the Natural Features Working Group, try to get more emphasis on this channel of dealing with climate change.
Thanks, Chris.
Okay, thanks, Chris. Any other comments? Shannon?
I'm wondering if there's some way to kind of dovetail with the Ordinance Review Committee to identify what of our own codes and standards are holding us back from being able to really fully implement the vision that I think people are excited about. And I completely agree with you about the right-of-way opportunity. And at the same time, I have been told many, many times that we can't do these things in the right-of-way. And so there are lots of ways I feel like that we could be kind of thinking about our own house in terms of what we need to do to be able to shift things so that there is more opportunity to kind of work all of these angles, because there isn't a ton of room, right? So we're going to need to be able to kind of maximize that and think about that. So the Ordinance Review Committee is, really dives into that stuff deeply and has a really nuanced sense of sort of how changes have implications. This is a subcommittee of the Planning Commission, but I'm just wondering if there's some sort of way to collaborate to be able to identify where some of those areas are where we get in our own way. And obviously health, safety, and welfare is super important, but I also think that it's just like, this is the way we've done it for X amount of years that is also part of the thinking that's gone on too. And that it's such a heavy lift to change code that it's kind of like, oh, it's just too hard, right? It just wasn't in your presentation, and it doesn't necessarily need to be like a big heavy thing. I just think it's an opportunity with this for us to kind of have a fresh look at our own codes and ordinances and standards to be able to think about how we can really shift, just have a kind of a new set of eyes, on that. So I guess that's something that might be an interesting way to kind of blend some synergistic, possibilities between commissions to really come up with something that we feel like, here's the top 5 things that we feel like need to change in order for us to really be able to accomplish what we want to try to accomplish here, with the very real understanding that it is achingly slow to change these things. And what does it mean to think about, maybe that's even an issue that we can take on. It's just like how, government needs to be so thorough because you get sued, right? But if we're going to make these changes, it's going to have to be faster than, the 2 years it takes to change an ordinance. So what does that mean?
I think that needs to be on the list, this idea. And I mean, Shannon, so for everyone else's edification, I talked to the Planning Commission in a work session, and this was one thing that very clearly emerged for me. And so if the group decides you would like to do that, I would be delighted to set up a committee. And I think your point is 100% right, that it's achingly slow to change these things. 1, that's a problem. And 2, that's why we have to start now.
Right.
John C., and then Rita.
Thanks, Steve. Missy, thanks so much for putting this all together. It answers and a lot of questions that I've had as A20 has been rolled out and thinking about the role of the commission, and gives us some really good ideas for how we might kind of better organize and support kind of mutually beneficial activities. just one idea and one offer. One idea is I'm wondering under the opportunity assessments if there needs to be another category there for commuters, given that that's such a huge part of our community. So I don't know if that's already been considered and folded in someplace, but that just was an idea that came to me. And then on the survey, no surprise, happy to help you with that in any way that you need.
We should align that with Skip very
Yep.
much in my thinking. Yeah, that's great.
Yep.
Okay, Rita? Oh, you're muted. You're muted.
Hold on. See if we can unmute.
Here we go. Sorry.
There-
I realize this is the Environmental Commission and not the Energy Commission, but what isn't described here is things like the implementation of solar panels or other forms of energy. So is that excluded from the Environmental Commission, or how does it work?
It just hasn't historically been something the commission has picked up. So I based the presentation on kind of where the interest had been and the working groups that had been formed. The Energy Commission has a similar presentation, and it is different. It is very energy focused because that very clearly sort of aligns. So it's not a exclusion. It is more based on a guess of the journey where we've been, knowing that and figuring out where there might be interest to go.
Okay.
So field is open, Rita. Yeah.
Thanks.
Okay. The floor is open for comments. Anybody else? First, Peck, then John Mursky.
Thanks. Just to get back to Chris's comment, of course, I don't think Missy, she might be saying this, but I don't think Missy's saying we just only work on A20. There are other priorities, undoubtedly. And our job is to find ways to maybe get synergy between the different goals. One goal, this is a question for Missy, is one aspect of the vegetation issue is we won't be able to eliminate all carbon emissions, and certainly not scope 3 emissions. And so we're going to need to find other ways to get rid of those. And one way is through carbon sequestration with natural ecosystems or non-natural ecosystems. And so that could be a possible way to really focus a little more on what Chris was talking about. That would be quite relevant to reducing our carbon footprint. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I'm sure you already thought of this.
No, I think that's a great one. And I might even break it up to carbon sequestration and offsets as separate. Like we might have a group that thinks about them together, but they certainly could be separate. I would welcome thought partners in thinking through that strategy as well. Even, from the offset perspective, I didn't put that on the table, but we won't have full 100% greenhouse gas reduction within the purview of Ann Arbor. Like we will have to have offsets. And so that's another area. And just Chair Brown, so you know, I also am capturing notes on the additional ideas so we can circle back as needed.
Okay, John.
Yes, thank you. Thanks, Missy. First of all, also thanks for Emily sending it out in advance so that we could take a look at this. I provided comments to the commission and everybody I think that's attending. So first of all, I have less experience than you, Missy, on commissions. I've been a commissioner for 4 years. But speaking from the experience that I have had, both working in commission meetings as well as serving on multiple working groups, my view is that work is virtually never done in commissions. Work is done outside of the commission in working groups, either informal or ad hoc informal groups, and then brought back to the commission. So I think anything that we look at in your list that is for the full commission really needs to be done outside of the commission as a whole and needs to be championed by, in effect, a working group. Secondly, I counted up the various points that you have here, and it's roughly 20. And if we roughly split that in half between the two working groups, that's roughly 10 per working group. And my experience is that working groups really are only effective when they're dealing with one issue at a time. I'll give you what I view as a very good example of a working group. And that is the working group that's been working on a new lighting ordinance. It's been basically driven by one very, very passionate person. That's Professor Sally Owie, who many of you know. There have been 4 of us, including her, that's been working on the working group. And we meet regularly, and it's really been driven forward and made a lot of progress. The EV charging group has also been one that I think has made quite a bit of progress. Those groups have been very, very, what I would say, task-oriented and not focused on a broad range of issues. If I may, I'm going to be critical of myself and one of the groups that I'm on, and that is the solid waste working group. You know, we've been meeting now for 1.5 years, and we talk about a whole lot of different things, but we've really never tackled one, and we've never really finished a single really task yet. So my advice to the group is that if, for example, carbon sequestration and ecosystem preservation is something that is really, really important to someone that's really passionate, that person form a working group. They recruit commissioners and they recruit people from the community who are passionate about that and work on something and bring it back to staff and to the commission with a proposal for resources or an ordinance or whatever it may be, and then drive it to completion. But to simply expect that we're going to divide up into working groups and work on a bunch of things simultaneously, I think is unrealistic. I think the other thing is, I mean, I'll just speak frankly about what I see in terms of commissioners responding to specific requests from staff on can we do X or can people review meeting minutes? And I've spoken with multiple staff, and usually commissioners, there may be 1 or 2 commissioners that even respond to a specific request. So I really, really hope that what we do is based on not what is wonderful and what is great, but on what is realistic with the idea that we get something done.
Yeah. And John, just to respond to 2 points, I think first to your second, the list was not like, here's a work plan. It was, here are some ideas, right? To see what like may resonate with folks. So I agree with you completely. Like we're going to have to laser focus on that. And second, I disagree that the commission isn't right for some of those overarching things because those are being led by staff. And the idea for those is to come and say, hey, we have a draft survey. We circulated in advance. Let's get feedback. And if we need to go to a working group, we might do that. But I actually think the collective knowledge might be really valuable. And so those are things where we already are going to lead. Like we already have the capacity carved out, but we need input. And I think that input is best provided kind of at that level. There may be times to go to work groups, but the idea when I thought about it was much more the collective body's knowledge and the interaction and the bouncing back and forth of the collective body actually makes us stronger. And so that was the thought process.
Okay. I'm pleased to hear that you have capacity and staff to do this. I know we're losing Emily. I think we're gaining new staff. Hopefully, I believe that's the case. Maybe you can update us on that. But we've got a huge and steep mountain to climb, and with A20, without taking into account some of the other kinds of things that have been proposed. And I think getting back to Peck's original statement, we really need to think about what is it that is our priority area and what do we focus on, and that we don't try to do too much.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And I will take that as a pivot. Emily is, I think she will share her update with you, is transitioning. Thea has accepted a full-time role and so is coming in so we don't actually lose capacity. And then we have made an offer for an energy manager position, which was just accepted. So we haven't announced who it is yet, but we will actually be all seats in OSI will be filled, even though it'll be remote, they'll be filled.
Okay, Rita,
Will you backfill Thea real quickly?
Sorry?
Will you be able to backfill Thea?
I did finagle that, yes.
Okay. All right, so Rita?
I just had a question. I know, Missy, recently you mentioned some, I think it was at the last council meeting, you mentioned the work plans that are started. And I wonder if that's something that you could share with us so that we can understand the direction of how staff is moving forward.
Rita, I'm not particularly comfortable with that. That's my job, to manage the staff and to make sure as a city employee that they're doing their things. I'm happy to come back and give report outs on the things that we're doing, but that feels like it's an extension into our job as employees. It almost feels like it's feels a little bit of an overstep. So I'd like to understand more of what you're looking for. And what
I think just seeing the list to know, because I saw it quickly on a screen, and it just would be nice to know what the specifics are that you're working on. That's all.
And I'm happy to give
information.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Okay. Anybody else would like to make a comment? Peck?
Yeah, I'm not doing this just to always maintain a lead on everyone else's question number. But one thing, Missy, that if we were meeting in person and in the various venues where we might do that, we could cover this kind of stuff. But let's use this as an opportunity. As you know, being on the U of M's Carbon Neutrality Commission, there are a lot of things that U of M has to do. There are a lot of things you need to do and we need to do in Ann Arbor. And one of the things I'd love to do, and I want to be aware of overpromising, because I don't want John to use me as an example, which I could easily fall into, of someone who like didn't get it done, because we got a lot of other things going on. But I would love to see if we can find some areas where we could get you know what we're talking about here, but get groups of students in the form of our master's projects, maybe from across campus, not just within our school, to focus on topics that U of M needs, and to focus hopefully on the same topic that would also benefit Ann Arbor. And there might be some that only benefits one or the other, but we could focus on those too. But it would really be nice. I would welcome the opportunity to sit down with you and your staff or anybody and people on this call to really sort of think through the various solutions we need to implement or to explore before we implement, and see where we might make sense to create a master's project. Now, for those of you who don't know what I'm talking about, is that we have groups of students do capstones in the School of Environment and Sustainability. All other schools tend to have these capstones too, but they don't tend to be as extensive. But nonetheless, I think eventually we'll have more students from all over campus interested in things. And it's conceivable that some of you or some other colleagues or citizens could help mentor these projects. Because an essential element is we have professors on one side mentoring, and then we have quote unquote clients in the real world mentoring. And of course, it's not, someone like Missy would be and has been a wonderful mentor, but she's got a lot of stuff on her plate. So one way we might be able to do sort of what John is talking about and multiply our efforts a little more is to get some of these student groups working on things. And these are not undergrads, these are graduate students. Some of them have MBAs and other advanced degrees in engineering and environmental justice, all sorts of things. And you can put them together in groups that are ideal for sort of an interdisciplinary solution. So the one example I gave, which is looking at how we can augment carbon sequestration, is something that I've had a master's project working on for our University of Michigan properties, and would be a natural extension to get another one to sort of work on the next stage. But there are going to be other ones too. So that might be a way that our commission, and the Energy Commission for that matter, could get a little more done per unit time. Missy knows all about what I'm talking about. So the question is, what do you think, Missy, about that as a possible way to multiply our efforts?
I know John Mursky has looked at this on the food system side of things. Yeah,
Oh,
staff
good.
use a
Yeah,
lot
food
of the
systems
masters
are really, they're into that. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's a great opportunity as we identify where the commission wants to go, how to leverage that. I mean, we're all connected and want to train the next generation of leaders in this space too. So if we can get capacity, be training them, that pollination is really great. So I would certainly welcome and support an application, but I do appreciate the creative thinking of possibly having another mentor. That's not us.
Okay. Wait, Ann Bannister has a hand up. I just noticed.
Yes, these are all great ideas, and I would love it if I had time to help mentor a college student. And I love all these comments about the natural carbon sequestration system and restoring the savanna and all of that. I think that would be right up my alley, so I agree with that. And Shannon's comments about getting the ordinance and codes and standards in our way out of the way. So this is all very exciting. And I just wanted to add to it when we talk about the right of way, that made me think about Council Member Smith and I, our council update can say that a small sidewalk millage is going to be on the November ballot. And I'm just trying to think outside the box about how the right-of-way improvements how the right-of-way improvements might be a synergy with the new sidewalk millage somehow.
That's great. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for bringing that to my attention too. Thank you.
Okay, John, you had your hand up earlier.
I had just had a quick question for Peck. My understanding is that there's a once-a-year opportunity to submit student project proposals, and that's in the spring. Is that correct, or when do we have opportunities to engage students?
We've moved that up to the fall. So we're going to start right in the beginning of the semester to socialize ideas. And I don't remember the exact timing where, it's the end of the deadline, you can't do anymore, but it's going to be in the fall. And then so that way, by the time we hit the new year, the student teams are already formed and are getting stuff done. So the sooner we start thinking of these ideas, the better. I mean, obviously the summer gives us time. And the other thing is, we're not going to roll this out immediately, but one of the things that we're working hard on, and this will make Ann happy maybe, is that we're going to create a clinic which is designed to provide additional help for these master's projects between the professor, the students, and the client or clients. But they're also going to be looking for other types of student engagement that would be more along the lines of an internship, paid or not. And I would think that some C students would love to work with a councilwoman to help her, figure out great things for the city of Ann Arbor. And, or, you might need GIS, or you might need some skill that's a hard thing to accomplish. And it would be something for their resume and for their heart to feel like they did something good. And obviously, so all those things are on the table, and I could explore them more. The one thing I have to be careful of as dean is I can't really tell someone to do this. What we have to do is get your help to make it exciting for the students, and then they will hopefully, come and do the job you want. And I think we get even more bang for the buck if we can find some synergies on these master's projects between what we need at U of M and Ann Arbor, but it doesn't need to be that way.
Okay.
So, yeah, we could have a whole session, maybe not a whole session of this, but an ad hoc working group talking about this for those who are interested.
No, to me, that seems like an excellent idea. I mean, I think we ought to have a small group to work on this. I would think it might include Peck and John Mursky and Missy and maybe one of the council members. Yeah. So Chris, do you have a comment?
The Natural Features Committee is working toward a proposal to put to the students this fall about greatly improving our understanding of the natural features in Ann Arbor. For example, our natural features map contains information about Ann Arbor's forests that is dated 1990 and was done with an automated system that couldn't distinguish between a buckthorn thicket and an oak woods. That's a problem.
Yeah, that's a problem.
So this would require some adroit students at using existing aerial imagery and interpreting it, and probably some cross-checking field work, which would be very interesting to do, so that we have a better understanding of where our native forest fragments are, how they're expanding, where the opportunities are for reforesting the city. A lot of that happens to be in our lowest income areas of the city, where we really need to concentrate our efforts to get the biggest bang for the buck for incentive monies or programs spent to get better conservation of our natural features in the city. I hope we have that proposal ready to go early fall. Be there, Peck.
That's
Okay.
cool. And one of the things some of you know already is that we have a pretty much a world famous environmental justice program and students in the environmental justice area. And one of the things we often can do is put an environmental justice student on one of these projects to really help make sure that we consider equity and justice when we're, say, thinking about what are we going to do in these lower income areas of the city. We don't want to just sort of impose things. You want to really make sure that the local community members have a say, and we structure it in a way that it works for them as much or more than everybody else.
So it's true that the higher income areas of the city are north of the river, or more or less that, where there were steep slopes because of moraines, and where the native forests of 1824 have returned substantially. South of Stadium, most land was farmed and completely clear cut, and the native forest fragments down there are very rare and for the most part haven't returned. Mm-hmm. And when you put up a subdivision in a farm field, it's not the same as Ann Arbor Hills or anywhere near the Arboretum or many places north of the river. And so there really is a connection between mature trees and property value. Mm-hmm. And it's not just street trees. We really need to find a way to work across the entire landscape of Ann Arbor. Obviously, the city can't pay to plant a tree on private property, but we can facilitate that happening in probably many ways.
We also have environmental economists, and one of the things they can do, if we have the right student, is they can actually do a study to tell you how much property value is affected by different revegetation strategies, and in some cases then provide incentive or to get people excited about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, these are all good ideas, but we need to figure out how to focus this down into something that's actionable. Do we have more specific goals that are prioritized, for these projects? So I'm thinking about what kind of mechanism we can put in place to do this, and I think this is obviously going to require a fair amount of discussion offline. So,
and I'm sorry it happens at the same time we have probably drastically reducing city budgets. I mean, this is, we're facing years of difficulty here, folks.
Yeah, we don't need to pay the students. We have the resources for that.
Yep.
But if we want them to do something that costs money, then of course you have to, like surveying or something.
Commissioner Brown.
Missy, I'm sure has.
Okay.
Yeah, I was just going to say, if it's open to folks, what I might recommend is just a proposal that perhaps we kind of step away from the conversation, and I would be happy to work with staff to facilitate some sort of kind of half-day workshop where we really work through what the Environmental Commission wants to have be its focus. We can bring these ideas to bear, maybe do like some pre-work, but it sounds like we're not going to necessarily get, maybe we will, but it didn't seem like we were quite ready for total resolution tonight.
Mm-hmm. No, that's correct. So I think what the next step would be to have some sort of a meeting, that's congruent with the Open Meetings Act, where we can have a broader discussion about this offline. And I would remind people that we do have a time scheduled later in the agenda for this discussion to continue. So meanwhile, we might pass on to the solid waste update, and we will take up this discussion again later. But I think I see an action point. One of the things I want to do is try to establish action points for each of these meetings. And so I would say the first one is that Missy is going to set up a meeting where the commissioners can engage and we can work through some ideas about potential SEAS project. Is that agreeable to you, Peck?
Sure.
Okay.
If that's what Missy was talking about.
Yeah.
Especially.
Actually,
but I think
work plan.
Big part of
it. I was thinking for the whole work plan for the commission, but this being a part of it.
Yeah, that's what I thought you were. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, let's just offline brainstorm that, Missy, in terms of what you think would be the best way. Because I think it'd be ideally involve staff, but I think it would be great to have some members of this commission involved too, because a big part for the students is getting the right mentors. And without the mentor, or you're the clients, let's call them, but they're mentors too. Without those, it doesn't happen.
Okay.
And as we said, it can't all be you. I don't think we should forget the ordinance idea that Shannon brought up. I mean, I don't know where we're going with that, but that seems like the sooner we start working on that, the better.
Mm-hmm. Well, exactly. I mean, I think I'll just say a word here, and then I think we should move on. But I mean, I've been trying to get the commission to become more goal-oriented and to have action points instead of focusing on processes, and agreeing to processes. So I think John Mirsky's suggestion is right on, that if somebody wants to champion something, let's have a list of things that need to be done. And if people volunteer to pick up on them and be responsible and accountable for it, I'm all for that. Okay. But we need to be careful in selecting and just spreading ourselves too thin, but we need to have SMART goals and let's work to achieve them. And an important thing are the legal barriers to what needs to happen for the community in general. Okay, so I'm going to end discussion about this. Again, we'll take it up later. And so the next item on the agenda is a solid waste update from Eileen Naples.
Hi, everybody, and thank you, Chair Brown and commissioners, for having me tonight. I've had the opportunity to meet many of you through the Solid Waste Working Group and just being through city staff and being out in the community. But for those whom I haven't met yet, my name is Eileen Naples. I am the Resource Recovery Manager in the city's Public Works Office, so I work on solid waste. Just by way of background, I moved to the area last August. I spent, the year before I moved here as Oregon Department of Environmental Quality's Hazardous Waste Policy Analyst, and 15 years previous to that working for US EPA at their headquarters on solid waste management that eventually transitioned into sustainable materials management policy. And now I am so excited to be working at local government where the action is. So thank you for having me here tonight. So I wanted to provide an overview, because we haven't had the chance to meet. I wanted to provide an overview of what the Solid Waste Office, our team of 3 has been up to, 3.5, has been up to this spring. like many of you, many of your programs and work areas, and just personally, the solid waste office has been impacted by COVID-19. So a lot of our work has been making adjustments to services. So I wanted to take the opportunity to give a shout out and a thanks to our solid waste drivers who throughout all of this have been making sure they continue operations and services and putting themselves out there on the front lines while the rest of us are lucky enough to be able to work from home. So I just want to recognize those staff first and foremost. Otherwise, other than introducing myself and recognizing staff, I did circulate through Emily, thank you Emily, a written report. So that's got a lot of updates. I won't cover all of those here, but I wanted to touch on some highlights and just start a conversation, introduce myself and say I'm available to you all for questions tonight and otherwise. And I'm looking forward to dialogue on lots of important issues. So first of all, I wanted to touch on some budget updates. I know that John and Steve and others in the solid waste working group have asked for more regular solid waste budget updates. So it's my goal to provide this on a more or less quarterly basis to this body by way of these updates similar to what I provided for tonight's meeting. Some of you have asked, so this will constitute mostly quarterly operations and maintenance updates, as well as semi-annual updates on the solid waste fund balance. So we have one in February that city staff presents to council, and there's another one that happens around October. That's the final solid waste fund balance. And as you know, this final number is impacted by a number of factors and spending that happens. So for example, city staff presented a number to council in February, but by the time this October rolls around, that number will have been impacted both by the recent council resolution appropriating approximately an additional $470,000 to pay the remainder of Recycle Ann Arbor's municipal recycling recovery contract for this year, as well as if we are successful in negotiating our materials recovery facility contract, the solid waste fund balance will also, you'll see an impact from an impairment for the MRF. So we will update you as we can come this, as soon as possible, but definitively come this fall. So I just wanted to clarify that that's my hope moving forward, is to provide regular updates. I'd also like to touch on some exciting diversion trends in the city. First, I'd like to note that traditionally we've covered diversion trends just by overall diversion, what is recycled and composted is one figure, and then what goes to trash is another. We've been recently examining how to report diversion trends a little bit differently. So you'll see in the report that we are looking into segregating this information by residential versus commercial, just to give us a little bit more nuance as we look at this picture. So please forgive us as we work through our approach and perfect our approach to this new accounting system. So with that in mind, our overall adjusted diversion trend in 2019 was 33%. So this constitutes materials going to recycling and compost in the city. This was a 3.7% increase over 2018. So that's a positive trend. The residential sector, as typical, accounted for the majority of materials diverted at over 60.2%, while the commercial sector diverted 10.4%. And keep in mind that our residential sector, that diversion rate accounts for both recycling and compost, while our commercial sector only accounts for recycling. So these numbers account for both some positive trends as well as plenty of opportunities for improvement. And we will continue reporting on them. Take a sip of water. I know many of you or many in the community, at least from what I can tell, are interested in compost. So I did want to provide an update on that as well. The 2020 compost season kicked off in April. The city did have to make some temporary adjustments for the safety of our staff. So namely, we had to temporarily suspend curbside pickup of compost bags and bundled twigs and wood. To make sure we continued to divert this material, we provided roll-off bins at the We Care compost facility, and we were pleased to see people taking advantage of that. Since the end of June, we are now back to full service and have implemented a number of safety measures so we can keep our solid waste drivers protected because they're they have to get out of. They service the carts with a sidearm, but they have to get out of their trucks and physically pick up bags and bundled wood and sticks. So they are very much involved in the materials management side of things. We were also thrilled this spring to see a surge in demand for residential compost carts. We attribute this demand both to city staff's outreach efforts, as well as the fact that we were able to make for a short period of time, we were able to provide cart delivery for free. So we saw a surge in demand and placed more than 800 carts between April, when the compost season started, and June, as of right now. So just to put that into perspective, that's more than a day's compost route of new carts. And that's with the current drivers and vehicles that we have now. So we are really excited about that and hope to continue that trend as best we can. Finally, I wanted to touch on, actually, and first I pause and apologize if I use too many acronyms. Someone in an email thread earlier mentioned that's a problem, and as a lifelong bureaucrat, I know I'm guilty of it. So Emily or someone, please stop me if I use too many acronyms. I was about to use the term MRF, which means Materials Recovery Facility, which is where we send materials to be recycled and processed. But I caught myself. So Materials Recovery Facility, or MRF. We are in the process in the city of negotiating a contract with Recycle Ann Arbor to re-equip the city's materials recovery facility for full processing. So the city staff have been engaged with RAA on this negotiation process for several months. It's a detailed and complex process, but we are hoping to bring an agreement, a lease for the MRF building and the surrounding land, as well as a bill of sale for equipment to council for consideration in July 20th, in hopes that we have a contract start date in early August. So this has been a great effort, and I've enjoyed working with RAA on that and hope to keep you all updated as we move forward. Okay, so finally, I did want to touch on, excuse me, our solid waste, the status of our solid waste resource management plan, or SHRIMP is the acronym I'm going to use. I noted that Councilmember Bannister is really engaged with this issue and circulated an email earlier today on the topic. So some of my comments will speak to issues that Councilmember Bannister, you raised. And I just wanted to note that these comments are given in the spirit of shared dialogue and expanding the conversation. And I'm looking forward, Councilmember Bannister, to talking to you and Councilmember Eaton tomorrow, and to getting direction from the larger council in general as we move forward. And I look forward to your questions as you have them on this topic. So a lot of this is background. There's a lot to unpack here. So again, this will be an expanding conversation. These are just a set of considerations. For tonight, I'd like to touch on some background information. First, a little history and goals of the Solid Waste Resource Management Plan. In 2018, City Council passed a resolution directing staff to complete a solid waste plan that laid out a strategic approach on how to provide solid waste, recycling, and compost services, and that acts as a business plan that guides solid waste operations between 2019 and 2023 in a fiscally responsible and sustainable manner. City staff worked with a consulting firm to develop this plan with the help of a significant amount of community input. So I suspect that many of you sat on advisory committees or received phone calls from staff or a consulting firm and were able to provide input. And I wanted to thank those of you who were able to participate. After staff presented the resulting plan to council on January 6th, council tabled the plan, and we have not received a staff direction, formal direction from council since then, although we have received input in the form of emails and other questions from individual council members, which we appreciate. I wanted to touch on several different features of the plan that I think will be interesting to this group. One feature of the Solid Waste Resource Management Plan is the interrelatedness of all of its components and recommendations. So I mean that in two senses. First, many aspects of the shrimp or Solid Waste Resource Management Plan are deeply integrated with the community's zero waste goals and now with the A20 initiative. So you'll see that in the form of the compost programming it discusses and other initiatives as well. Second, it's another feature of its interrelatedness is that in order to provide funding for some of the initiatives discussed in the plan, including year-round compost, residential compost, the shrimp identifies how cost savings in some areas can provide funding for other priority areas. So in that way, it's very interrelated. Its components are interrelated as well. And I know in particular, as we have difficult budget conversations moving forward in the city, this feature of the plan is going to become even more important. So another feature of the plan is that it recognizes that diversion encompasses much more than just recycling as we know it traditionally. The shrimp touches on our community's understanding that increasing our diversion rate, our overall diversion rate, will include beyond recycling, a focus on compost. So for example, that's expanding year-round residential compost and expanding into commercial collection, as well as touching on other diversion opportunities as well. Some of the more notable ones being construction and demolition debris diversion, as well as textiles. So we're really trying to expand the city's portfolio and its diversion impact to the Solid Waste Resource Management Plan. So that's a little background on the shrimp. Now I wanted to speak to Councilmember Bannister and others directly to some of the questions you raised on another component of it, the residential recycling invitation to bid. So as one of the areas, I mentioned that there are some areas for savings the shrimp identifies that might impact other potential programs. So one of those areas that was most ripe for savings that the shrimp identified was the city's current recycling collection program. So just for situational awareness for the group, currently city union drivers, staff drivers, service residential or service recycling dumpsters, and Recycle Ann Arbor services residential, commercial, and multifamily units that use carts and 300-gallon totes. So we are kind of segregated in this manner. The shrimp had a cost of service analysis that concluded that by bringing residential recycling, so all of that cart service in-house to city staff, we would see a savings of almost $800,000 in the first year of operation in that manner, thus freeing up some funds for other services, including potentially year-round compost. There were some questions about our cost of service analysis, which we understood and are responding to, but ultimately we decided that for that residential recycling service, it was best to competitively bid the service. So this past April, the city released invitation to bid 4623, residential customer recyclables collection. And this ITB targets single family and multifamily homes with individual 32, 64, and 96-gallon carts serviced from driveways or street curbs. The bids are due July 1st, 2020. The city staff chose, we thought that the invitation to bid vehicle was appropriate, mostly because it allows for an apples to apples comparison, or in other words, a level playing field for comparison of critical recycling collection functions between bidders, no matter who that bidder is. So in this case, per our original shrimp recommendation, it could be the city, which currently provides recycling dumpster service. It could be Recycle Ann Arbor, our current collection provider for carts, or another bidder. This apples to apples comparison allows us to see how various bidders would respond to specified service that are both industry standards and best management practices. So this would include actions like tagging carts as education and outreach initiatives to identify contamination. This is one example of what's currently included in the ITB. As city staff thought about other aspects of collection that could be included, we thought a lot of those might be related to education, which city has both staff working on education outreach as well as contracts to other community entities, including Ecology Center, specifically focused on recycling, outreach, and education. So we really felt like there was an opportunity here that we were still targeting education in other ways, and we wanted to specifically hone in on aspects of recycling collection that would allow us an apples to apples comparison between bidders in order to identify both efficient service and effective service. So ultimately, I think while some have raised the question of why we didn't choose a request for proposal, it's this effort to identify cost savings that is one important aspect in addition to effective service. And the city is speaking from my own perspective, we're uncertain how an ITB disadvantages one bidder over another, because we see the ITB as an inherently fair process, allowing direct comparisons between bidders. We also consider that City Council and others might regard using local services and local vendors as a community value, and that's not necessarily something you can capture in economic terms. So I wanted to recognize that as well. Finally, there's been some questions about how the shrimp addresses recycling by sector instead of by stream. So I'd like just to elaborate on that. By sector, as the shrimp is organized or proposes, means splitting services between single family homes and other properties serviced by carts. Commercial on one hand, commercial and multifamily units serviced by dumpsters on another hand, and then the downtown area on the third hand. So those are three different sectors, and that's what the Solid Waste Resource Management Plan allows for. And really our goal in making that recommendation was to improve operational and fleet efficiency, have a single point of contact for residents and customer service, and downtown entities to reach out to. And then we also considered feedback from downtown stakeholders who noted that their particular situation presents unique spatial and service needs and requires its own collection apparatus. So that's ultimately why we went with the sector approach rather than the stream and the shrimp. Although there are certainly other communities who choose to organize by stream. So I wanted to end there and just leave that out there for some thought considerations. I know that this is the beginning of dialogue and that there's a lot to work through here. So I look forward to your feedback and I appreciate your notes.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Eileen. That was very informative. Are there any questions for Eileen? Chip, and then Bob.
Thanks, Eileen. I have one question. I understand the idea of going out with the invitation to bid. Has your office or Public Works in general basically put together a cost proposal for what that cost would be to do it in-house?
We have, and that's partially encapsulated by the cost of service analysis. I believe that we've had an independent auditor. I don't want to speak out of school,
Sure.
But my understanding is that we've had an independent auditor check those numbers, and we'll open that up as part of the response to the bid, as the city's response.
Okay, so that's what I wanted to see, if the city was essentially going to submit a response to see how we stacked up against everybody else.
Absolutely. And that was to our initial recommendation and observation that city staff think we could do a terrific job and achieve cost savings. So we know that we recognize there's some questions about that analysis and appreciate that, and just wanted to respond accordingly as we put in our bid.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that answer very much.
Okay, let's see, Bob Needham.
I really appreciate the entire report. A lot of great information. And in particular, I appreciated getting the breakdown by sector and the diversion trends. I was just curious, do multifamily dwellings, are they counted in the residential sector or the commercial sector?
So that's a great question. Thank you. And that's part of why I begged your forgiveness as we work through some nuances of this new way of accounting for diversion trends. Some of our multifamily units are serviced by carts and others by dumpsters. So we are still sorting through exactly which units go where. So there might be a little fuzziness in the numbers. We are working through that. And depending on where the solid waste resource management plan goes, we might have more clarity on that end because we would have a better accounting for what vehicle, what cart or dumpster was where.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Anybody else? Chris Graham.
Eileen, I'm very grateful to you for coming to work for the city of Ann Arbor. We have needed a true and deep professional in the solid waste department since a whole lot of people retired about 10 years ago or 8 years ago. I'm really excited to have you here. Thank you. I'm not qualified to really ask questions on solid waste, but I can tell we have good help. Thank you.
Thank you. And I am glad to be a part of the community where those very same professionals are still engaged in the solid waste dialogue.
Thank
I have
you.
the opportunity to work with a lot of them on various platforms. So, and I appreciate learning from their experience.
Thanks for coming here.
Thank you.
Okay, anybody else have a comment? Or John Mursky.
I have two questions. First of all, Eileen, in the past, some of us had access to a tonnage report that broke down recycling landfill tonnages by sector. Has the accounting, if you will, changed with the new report? Or is it, do you know if it's roughly the same?
John, I might have to follow up with you to dig in a little bit more on that question because I'm not as familiar with the past practices. Since I came on board the city, I noted that city reported overall diversion rates and landfill rates, not by sector. In my limited experience, the only previous report I saw of diversion by sector came from the solid waste resource management plan that was city staff put together with the help of Aptum consulting firm. And so what we've tried to do is mirror Aptum's their diversion calculation as best we can until we have additional information as the shrimp moves forward.
Right. If it has, I would point out just to everyone, if it mirrors that past accounting, I would like to point out, I mean, I have it here in front of me, that the past commercial diversion rate hovered around what used to be 12.5% or so. It dropped a little bit, but it was around 11 to 11.5. And now it's I think you reported 10.5. So while it dropped, the overall diversion rate increased, which is an indication that we're having greater success in the residential area, which is great. I think it's probably also, the new carts and things like that, some of the other past initiatives. Also a year ago with this pilot project that was done, more carts, more compost. But what at least according to the report, the previous breakdown, the tonnage in the commercial sector is higher than it is in the residential sector. So we're doing extremely well apparently in the commercial or in the residential sector, especially if you add on the fact that we're not even counting the bottle law. If you compare what we would normally compare to other cities that don't have a bottle law in the state, our diversion rate is in the residential area pretty damn high, and it doesn't even reflect the fact that a lot of our bottles are being reflected, bottles and cans. So really, my point is there's seemingly a huge opportunity in the commercial side to make big improvements. And at some point, it's going to get more and more difficult to make improvements in the residential side. The other question that I had was, the city paid $250,000 plus roughly another 10 because we had an additional set of meetings consultants for the shrimp. It engaged roughly 40 or so advisory committee people that met multiple times. In other words, there was a lot of resources put into writing the shrimp. We've been operating without one since the end of 2017. I would like to know from staff, and it doesn't have to be tonight, whether or not we need a solid resource management plan or not, because we spent a lot of resources developing one that is, I'm sure, guiding staff to some degree, but we don't have anything that's approved by council that says this is what we agree in terms of a strategic plan. And if we don't have something like that and don't need it, then we can save a lot of resources, both out-of-pocket money as well as staff time and everybody else's time. And in effect, what I'm also pointing to is to Ann and to Chip and the rest of council, and that is, it seems to me that we should have a solid waste strategy that is endorsed by council, and that the staff can then use basically to then implement according to, and we then the Environmental Commission can support in terms of our aligning our activities and our advisory role with that strategic plan. So I guess the question is, do we need a shrimp? Do we need an approved shrimp?
Do either of the council members want to weigh in on here? It's been my observation is that council, there has been a relative lack of alignment. I mean, as I recall, 3 years ago, there was an organics pilot project that was actually a consultant was paid and a plan was made, and then staff never allocated the money that the council had assigned to it. And there are other such things. So I'm wondering what the commission can do as a whole to help better align, staff and council.
By the way, that was roughly $100,000 as well. So we've spent $350,000 on out-of-pocket consultants plans and have yet to really execute against those. Well, admittedly, I know, Eileen, some of the things that you're doing right now are executing according to the shrimp. Some of them obviously were things we needed to do anyhow.
And exactly, I would like to, I'll open the question about the shrimp to the council members, but in terms of what we're currently executing, it is what we need to execute because we have contracts ending and the service, we need to provide the service. Our preference is certainly to have a council approved roadmap that allows us to both align our organics and other initiatives with our zero waste goals and A20 initiatives, and provide the most efficient and cost-effective service we can for the city.
Okay, that's all very encouraging. So I think if there are no more questions for Eileen, let's move on to the next item on the agenda, which is integrated pest management update from Jen Lawson.
Thank you, everybody.
Okay. Thanks, Eileen.
Jen, you should be able to share your screen, and you're muted currently.
Thank you. Similar to Eileen, I think I have met many of you, but for the benefit of the group, I will give a little overview of myself. I am a civil engineer's daughter, so I can talk like an engineer, but I failed calculus, and so I'm a landscape architect. I have my undergraduate in environmental policy and law, focusing on water resources, and then I finished my MLA over at the studious University of Michigan. In fact, I actually teach over in the studios over there, one of the graduate level landscape architecture courses. So thank you to Peck for that. Just a little bit of a background though, the work that I do at the city is in the systems planning unit. So my title is Water Quality Manager, and that really means all things water, including sanitary sewage, drinking water, the natural river system, as well as stormwater. And we'll talk about stormwater a little bit tonight. But most of what I focus on is the regulatory compliance for the city for all of those systems, the asset management for those systems, as well as capital improvements, as well as operations and maintenance. And so it's a very multi-departmental, cross-departmental liaison between internal to public works, engineering, the planning department from a development standpoint. But I also work with external agencies on a regular basis. I am the liaison and contract manager for all of the work that we do with the Washtenaw County Water Resource Commissioner's Office, with the Huron River Watershed Council, as well as with SEMCOG. So there's a lot of larger regional initiatives. I'm going to talk a little bit about that as well tonight. So I kind of wanted to give you some context of, yes, I work in the city, but because water doesn't stop at our city borders, there's a lot of external agencies that also we partner with, and we've been partnering with for since as long as I think anyone can remember at the city. So I will share my screen quickly. So I do have a few slides that I want to run through, specifically focused on the integrated pest management program that the city was tasked to continue implementation of. So just some background for those commission members who may not be aware, there was a presentation given by the Natural Areas Presentation Group, I believe to Environmental Commission, about management of their natural areas, and they mentioned IPM. And from that presentation, there was a resolution that was created by the Environmental Commission and then passed along to the City Council, directing staff to focus on IPM measures for our greater community, not just looking internally at our own processes and procedures. So as a reminder, what IPM actually is, it's recognizing, and it's not managing those pests that are the nasty critters, it's recognizing that the pests or the insects and tiny little critters that we can't see are actually a part of our natural system. I heard you guys talking about natural ecosystems previously. IPM is just rolled right into that. It doesn't necessarily mean no chemicals. It means using chemicals as a last measure because Mother Nature has put into place so many processes that already work, if you will. What's interesting is that the city already had a multitude of existing materials from those larger regional entities that I mentioned. A little bit of background, the state of Michigan requires the city to have a municipal separate storm sewer system permit, an MS4, that's one of the acronyms that I use often. And that basically gives us a litany of requirements on how we manage our stormwater management system. As a part of that, there's a component of education of the community. That's businesses, residents, and guests into our community. Stepping even further, one of those components that we are required to educate our community on is in fact integrated pest management. There's one line in a 90-page permit that actually says integrated pest management from the state of Michigan. So there are materials that have been created regionally. So not just within Washtenaw County, but with SEMCOG, which is a 7-county governmental agency over that entire region, extending from St. Clair all the way down to Monroe, out to Livingston and Washtenaw. So we had materials. This wasn't a new thing for us. But again, as I mentioned, it's one line in a permit of 90 pages. And so what was wonderful for staff is that we were able to take materials that we've already put time and effort into several years ago and kind of give new birth to them, recreate them, and work with our marketing consultants to breathe new life into them. So these existing materials were wonderfully caricatured by David Zinn. So because in both solid waste and environmental issues, as well as with the Huron River Watershed Council, we have this wonderful Ann Arbor identity of David Zinn artwork. We were able to utilize those existing materials, and that's what we used in a lot of what we rolled out for our first phase. So the city, parallel with what the Environmental Commission was talking about with this IPM endeavor, we just recently hired a marketing firm to work on a stormwater outreach campaign. And this was a directive from an advisory group a few years ago. This is embedded into the stormwater program, but we hired a marketing company because I'm not an expert in marketing. I'm not an educator, but we knew that we needed to hire experts and really get the experts telling us how to get these important messages out to our community. So we sat down with them and gave them the existing artwork that we already had and said, what can we do? This was just around the time that we were all getting sent home to go sit at our kitchen tables. So we quickly had to switch a little bit. But what was great is that they gave us some phasing opportunities because they already had the materials. We didn't need to create anything new. So the first thing that was created was a landing page, a web page that was published in mid-April, focused on IPM. We had a 6-week social media blast because I'm not sure about you guys, but I know I was on my phone on Instagram all the time because there wasn't a whole lot else I could do after I got done working all day. We put out a press release as well, focused around IPM, pushing people back into that website. We had also talked about a phase 2, and I will talk about that later. What was proposed by the marketing consultant was what they called moving billboards. And this is great. This is exactly what you think. They drive around town in the summertime and they have wonderful messages. It doesn't have to be only about IPM. It can be any environmental message that we talk about. And even to the point where we made sure that it was an EV vehicle that would be moving these billboards around. And when we gave some hesitation to our marketing consultants, they actually pushed back a little bit and they said, well, everyone's home right now. Everyone's working from home. Everyone is working on their back deck. Everyone is hunkering down in this quarantine. Wouldn't it be great to have that billboard driving by as Joe homeowner is mowing his lawn or applying fertilizer? So we put a pin in that one, but I wanted to get some feedback from you. So as I mentioned, the first component, really that phase 1, was a press release that was put out. We have a web page called a landing page with specific information as well as all of the existing PDFs that we've already created, so we didn't have to create anything new. And then we had this 6-week social media blast on Facebook, Twitter, and Nextdoor. And we kind of had mixed results. They were all good results. Neither Facebook, Twitter, or Nextdoor came out as a clear winner, but we did recognize that the community is made up of a lot of people who use a lot of different digital platforms. Our focus, or our audience, if you will, for this first initial phase 1 was homeowners that are 25 to 65. Those hypothetically are the people that are going to be doing the lawn care at their home. That's the easiest and the low-hanging fruit for us at this point in time, because those are the people that care about their home. They have a connection to their home. So we wanted to focus on that as our audience. A quick overview of all of the social media. And pardon my language, I am not a social media person at all, really. But our marketing company insists to me that a Facebook reach is a good thing. It's more than someone just scrolling past it. It's that someone that actually spent time on it, whereas engagement is either a like or a comment. Same thing with the Twitter is a like or a comment or a share. And then same with Nextdoor, there's a like. We had a lot of wonderful comments on Nextdoor, and I think that that's really akin to the community in Ann Arbor that we all know and love. Nextdoor is really strong in Ann Arbor. Where I live, I think there might be 4 of us on Nextdoor, and it usually is information about the street light that's out, or there's a police officer checking license or checking taillights. So that's something that I think Ann Arbor really, from a social media standpoint, has a lot to offer from that Nextdoor opportunity. So I'm going to go through each of these posts really, really quickly, but you'll recognize that each of them have the Zinn artwork style. These are actually pulled from the existing materials. We started with an overview of what integrated pest management is, and then we had direct links in each of these to make sure that they were able to have additional resources based on our landing page. And then in many of these, we were able to see who retweeted it or who commented, how many comments there were. On Nextdoor, similar, we had so in each of these posts, it was the same messaging, if you will, across all platforms. And this started the end of April, just for reference. And so if you can put that in context of when we were all kind of just starting to get stir crazy, we'd been home about a month. Facebook really came out strong. Not sure if that's because the city of Ann Arbor has more Facebook followers, but we were able to really get a lot of broad numbers from Facebook, not necessarily the engagements though. So again, post number 2, we're still kind of switching from what is integrated pest management or IPM and more of a what can you do, giving you some hands-on ideas. We posted many of these things multiple times with the understanding that Twitter has a very, very quick turnover. It's a very fast-paced digital media format. Same thing with Nextdoor. Sometimes Nextdoor didn't come through. I'm not sure necessarily if this was at a time that there was another hot topic going on within our community, but that certainly is something that as we look back of all of the media things we've seen over the past, I think we're at 16 weeks now, IPM might not necessarily be at the stronghold or at the top of priorities. Again, this is Facebook number 2. We had a few less reaches on this one. Post number 3 was focused on pesticide use. And what we found was interesting, this 70% number is the number that EPA has been sharing. But we had a resident that pushed back and said, no, as a matter of fact, it is significantly less. So we, as the city, had a wonderful dialogue with some of the outreach specialists at EPA asking for some updated information. Again, on Nextdoor, a little bit more engagement. Pesticides tend to get people a little bit more passionate. Again, on Facebook, we posted it multiple times. There were a few shares and a few likes. Post number 4 was a little bit more general, but we were trying to go more on the lawn aspect of those people who actually own lawns, maintain lawns. What are the tips that they can focus on? Nextdoor, this was not a very hot topic at all. And we left a lot of these posts up there, the entire time. It just sometimes it really wasn't something that people were interested in or had any interest in. But ironically, Facebook gave us a very large reach on this same topic. And so that's why we're very happy that we chose to go with multiple digital media platforms, because sometimes, well, I know we're getting different audiences, but sometimes one topic is exciting to some and not to others. Post number 5, we actually moved over to the idea of rain barrels. recognizing that there are components of IPM that are focused around water use, water reuse, keeping the water natural. And we had some decent discussion around this one, a lot of engagement on Facebook. And in fact, there was a very large discussion that went back and forth because the drinking water plant does give away barrels that are used to convert into rain barrels. These are, barrels that we get chemicals for the water treatment process, but they are safe to use for the rain barrels, and we give those away when we have them. And that's a mechanism that we are able to do through our water program outreach. And then our sixth and last IPM post was specific to riparian owners. And so those are property owners that are adjacent to water, whether it's a detention basin, the river, a stream, a pond. They kind of have a special responsibility because they have that direct connection for runoff. And so we felt that this was a strong finish, if you will, kind of telling the whole IPM story. We had a few on Nextdoor and a fair amount on Facebook. So I wanted to run through each of those to kind of give you the breadth of how many people we are reaching and how many people are actually taking an interest in IPM. And that's something that we have really tried to balance, is that it's a lot of times we are looking to do outreach and education in a time where there's other larger media issues, and we recognize that as we were working through all of this process as well. So I've covered kind of all of the phase one work that we've done. And I did want to see if we could have some dialogue about what I had mentioned, the billboard thing with phase two. But I did, before we dive into that, I'm going to share a different screen. There were some questions that were received from Commissioner Mitchell, and I wanted to be able to answer those for the whole group. So I've typed them up. I've also sent these to Dr. Stoltz, and so she will have them available to send. And thank you, Commissioner Mitchell, for asking these questions. I think that they're certainly part of the program as we move forward. They're questions that we've already been asking ourselves internally. So the first question, specifically, what will the outreach efforts to the community in general, to businesses and religious organizations that have property that could be managed with IPM methods? And as I mentioned previously, the city's stormwater outreach program, which already encapsulates IPM outreach, coordinates with multiple community entities to do education on IPM. You'll see this stuff from the Watershed Council. You'll see this stuff from the Washtenaw County Water Resources Commissioner's Office. You'll see it from Sierra Club. You'll see it from Nature Conservancy. So it's not unique. One thing to note, though, is that we at the city, in the public services area, but essentially across the city, we do not have additional resources available to expand a whole lot farther than what we can do within our already existing contracts and methods. Second question, is the city following IPM methods for all of its properties? Yes. Number three, what measurements of progress will be used for IPM? You gave a few examples, and we have not determined that. We have not gotten a whole lot farther than we're going to do some outreach. In the digital media environment, we are able to look for, and that's why I gave the numbers, the number of likes, reaches, engagements, and those are very key from a marketing and outreach standpoint, because that does show that we are reaching people. I don't know if I would necessarily call that progress, and so we have not had an internal discussion about that. So number four, how will the IPM program be managed in an ongoing way that sustains the effort? IPM and outreach is already included in the city's education programs, specifically in our stormwater permit requirements already. It is not a topic, it is one cadre of hundreds of topics that we are mandated to educate on. Number 5, what outreach efforts will be made to vendors of plants, lawn care companies, other. And as I mentioned, we already coordinate with other multiple community entities to educate on IPM, and additional resources at this time are not available to continue to expand outreach efforts. So in closing, what I will mention is that we are continuing with our marketing firm of GUD, G-U with an umlaut, D, G-U-D, marketing to continue with our stormwater outreach and education program. We are focusing on our fiscal year 21 work plan, which ironically starts July 1st. And so that really opens up an opportunity if there are thoughts that we can weave into existing programs and existing endeavors that would be beneficial. So with that, I'm going to turn that back over to you, Mr. Brown.
Well, thanks for that update, Ms. Lawson. Are there any questions for Ms. Lawson? I see one from Chris Graham.
There we go. Jennifer, you're wonderful, and it must be an education to assemble all of this online social media outreach work. It's
not my background.
Yeah.
Not the marketing stuff, at least.
The message I see, though, is that we have so much to teach people. If this was a hot topic, it would be a hot topic, and it clearly isn't. And it goes back to this whole turf grass thing, and that I've been barking about for about 15 years. It's a cliche. It's something that so many people think is the right thing to do out their door. It's really difficult, I think, to break through that barrier, that way of doing things. And I'm not sure how we can do it, but we really need to. And your outreach efforts are really a total joy. But gosh, I wish you had 300 people saying, "Oh gosh, yes, indeed," rather than a handful. Maybe someday we can get there. Thank you. You're wonderful.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you.
I guess you're telling me to talk, Steve. You're muted. Just want to confirm that. Okay. Yep. Okay.
Yeah.
So
okay, John Callowart, and then
okay.
Sorry.
Okay. Jennifer, thank you for this. I just wanted to pick up on one.
Did we lose John?
John, we lost
you, John.
Can you repeat?
Okay. Sure. Okay. Now is the time it goes unstable. Okay. So Jennifer, thanks for putting this together. I wanted to revisit the question about that Rita raised about measurements of progress. Just because my suggestion would be that that can really help drive what you are trying to do with the outreach piece. So, whether that's, water quality goals, or that's, the things that Rita mentioned, or if you can get information on sales of rain barrels or whatever it is. But I think that can really help with driving it. I'd say from my perspective as a resident, I saw it all the time. And so you got me, but I was in the choir already. So I just think that might help if you plan to continue on with the outreach of thinking about what are the goals that you have and how can the messaging really help move you towards that. But to start with, and getting the broadcast of the information, I think was really important to do too. So I'm not dismissing that. I'm just saying as you move forward with it, have it kind of driven by some metrics at the point that Rita raised. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think
Thanks.
where staff really is struggling, and I will use the word struggling, is what you're asking really is a behavior-based metric. How do we measure how people change their behavior? And there are entire PhD programs on how to study that. And that's a very difficult thing, because what that really means is going into someone's mind and seeing if we've changed their mind or changed their behavior in some sort of quantifiable way. That is the crux of so many environmental metrics. I love the idea of measuring water quality, but the needle will not move quick. I love the idea of measuring, I think Rita had mentioned insects. I don't have enough interns, and Peck doesn't have enough grad students to count the bugs in Ann Arbor. I think that we need to think a lot about what those achievable metrics could be, but also the metrics that we can actually find and capture and measure. So I'm not dismissing metrics. I'm just realizing that we need to have a long thought about what that actually could be and really truly showing progress.
Exactly, and just going to put another plug in for a student project, right? That could be a really wonderful thing to focus on, and looking at what existing data that's out there, things that the watershed councils, already gathering that might help inform. But yeah, it's not an easy lift, and water quality change is slow, and behavioral change is right there with it too in terms of slow change. Yep. But thank you.
Thanks.
Okay. Any other questions? Carrie, yes.
Thanks, Jennifer. I wondered if you can give us some specific things that we can do to help support your work.
Off the top of my head, no, but I'm sure that I could think about it for a week or two. I think one thing that when it comes to the marketing and outreach, it's, we hired a company to do this. They're the pros, they're the experts. We're focusing on having them run a marketing campaign. I would not ask any of our commissioners, any of our public to actually step in and do that by any means. Being champions, absolutely. Being ambassadors, I know Missy mentioned an ambassador program earlier. Those kind of ideas in my mind really are where I see the public and our community really taking a role, because there's a lot behind the scenes from a governmental standpoint, what we can do and what our role is. But let me think about it a little bit, and I can certainly get back to the commission with what that might look like. It's a wonderful question.
Thanks.
Okay, Shannon.
So first of all, thank you, Jen, for this. I think you've, it's pretty admirable what you all did, based on sort of the input that came in and what, the reach that you all attempted to take on. One thing that's got me thinking is that I understand targeting the homeowners, but one thing that I was thinking about is a program that already exists that targets kids through the public schools in terms of the stormwater education program that happens in 4th grade and then happens again in, 7th grade. And they go on tours. And I'm just wondering if there's some way to add a little bit to that, where you look at kind of the difference between a lawn that has lots of inputs and what that does to water quality, and a lawn that basically you just let whatever grow there grow and you mow it. And that's a really simple thing that people can do, is just to stop the inputs. And it actually has a pretty profound impact on water quality.
Yeah.
And so sometimes the kids have a pretty, if they kind of come home and tell their parents, well, why are you, if you can educate them and like look for the signs in the lawn, when you see the sign in the lawn, then there's a story that's going on here. If they kind of go home and talk to their parents, well, why do we have a sign on our lawn saying that it's been sprayed, or how come we don't have any clover in our lawn? I'm just wondering if there's a way, because there's already a program in place, that it's another 20 minutes of dimension that's added to that tour, added to that curriculum that's already part of the public school system. And they're kind of young and open and righteous, that it might be kind of interesting to kind of to come at it from the side of you know, I think what Chris is saying, it's like the preformed opinions are pretty hard.
Yeah.
Pretty hard to change. But I wonder if kids pressuring their parents, like to recycle, to, you know what I mean, all those kinds of things, right? You know, I just wonder if there's a way, because there's already a system in place, that we kind of add that layer in to come at it from a different direction.
There is a system, Shannon. We've actually worked with the schools on an urban hydrology curriculum,
right.
based
No,
on the state's benchmarks and standards. But what we focused it around was stormwater, so runoff.
Right.
And I think it maybe is just a semantics change.
Yep.
Really, it's coming from runoff to these chemicals at all. And we can talk with the schools about that. I think that's an easy shift, and I really like that suggestion. So thank you.
Because I went on those tours, and so like the visual of the kind of pristine chem lawn, without using brand names and all that kind of business, versus the what I call like the freedom lawn, which has everything growing in it. You just mow it, but you can still play croquet on it. You can still play soccer on it. It's all okay, but there's no fertilizer and you know, herbicides and pesticides in it. That just that shift, because it is a big ask to convert your lawn into a native prairie. That is an evolution for people. That is huge. But just stopping the inputs can still work for people, you know, in terms of their functionality. And so I think like a stop on the tour that kind of shows those things side by side could be interesting for kids, and sort of how to get them to just start having eyes for that. I think might be not a lot of work on your part, you know, but maybe could produce some results. And that frankly, if it's metric oriented, it's how many kids reached.
I like it. Thank you.
Okay, first John and Rita, and then Chris, I think. John?
So what we've been talking about, having lived in Europe for 5 years, that's the way Europeans treat their lawns. They mow what's there, and that's green. And I think what we're talking about is frankly also, I agree with everything that's been said, but we're asking for a changed aesthetic. That's difficult, but I think we have to also explain why the new aesthetic, why the new paradigm makes sense, and why the old one doesn't. And that simply, if you have a lawn that's mowed and that's cared for, that's fine. It doesn't have to be a monoculture. So that's just one comment. Second comment briefly is I'd like to see what we're planning in terms of outreach to lawn care companies. And there's, you know, parts of town where a lot of lawns are maintained that way. I realize that's not uniformly the case across town, but I bet a lot of the acreage in town is maintained through those entities. And I think part of the design of our outreach should be through them. And then finally, I'd like to go back to the questions that Rita posed, and I'm going to be a broken record on this, is the only thing that matters is outcomes. And it may be difficult to move the needle, but if we're not moving the needle, then we're doing the wrong things, or we're not doing enough of them. And we have to measure, we have to look at whether or not we're moving the needle. And the same thing applies to greenhouse gas emissions or whatever the case may be. And if we're not moving the needle, then we can have IPM and we can have student education and we can have all these things, but they're either not executed right, they're not the right programs, they're not reaching enough people, whatever. So we have to also be looking at the needle, and it won't change quickly, but on some things it needs to change quickly. And greenhouse gas reductions is a perfect example of that. You know, from 2020 or excuse me, from 2000 to 2020, our greenhouse gas reductions went down 1% per year. They now need to go down roughly 10% per year. So that just shows that, you know, in some cases, we really do need to move the needle, and we need to be looking at the needle and not just whether we got so many engagements on Facebook or whatever. And I think we need to keep that in mind, that we need to be looking occasionally in this forum at the needle and whether we've moved the needle. But you've heard that from me before.
I know, and I don't disagree with you. I think where we struggle is how to make people change their behavior. You can bring a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. And that, I've done that for 25 years. I've been doing environmental education and outreach for 25 years. I struggle with it every day. I mean, I walk the walk in my own house, but my neighbors sure don't. It's, I think, going to be an uphill battle. I'm not saying we shouldn't have the battle, but I do want to really that what we're measuring is something that is appropriate. I don't want to just measure things to measure. And I think you and I have had that conversation a lot. I'm a very, very data-driven person. You know that. But if I'm not just going to collect data to collect data. So that's why internally we are going to have those discussions, really making sure that, and it's not going to be discussions just in the city, it's going to be in discussions with those regional entities, bringing in other resources and other experts. I mean, SEMCOG has data analysts that are at our beck and call, and they are struggling around these same issues as well. SEMCOG doesn't have an environmental commission that's giving them a lot of these wonderful ideas, but they're hearing it because I'm one of those local people saying, look, it's not just an Ann Arbor issue, it's a regional issue. We have to do something. So I'm not saying no, I'm saying we've got to figure out something, and we will definitely get back with you on that. So thank you, John.
Yeah, thanks, John. So I think it was Rita.
Hi, thanks, Jen. I really appreciate you paying attention to my questions and answering them. I guess a big thing of what I said was similar to what John just did, is that the measurement is really important to me as well. And somehow we have to get a baseline of something. And that's really the hardest thing. And I totally get it. That's what I was thinking, is like acres, or, you know, like, can you measure something in a big volume? And so as one of the things I didn't include in my intro today was, excuse me, I was a co-founder of Be Safe Ann Arbor. And one of the things that we did early on was literally knock on doors and ask people to sign a little pledge saying that they would not use pesticides on their lawns. It's a simple thing, but it kind of reminds me of the River Safe program, where people took a very simple test and agreed to do some things. Now, whether that has long-term teeth, I don't know, but something like that, you know, could potentially move the cultural thing.
We're talking about adding IPM to the River Safe in a more focused effort.
Good.
That's a really great one.
Is that, does that mean that River Safe will be repeated in the household? So like I signed up and we're River Safe, and so, okay. Great.
So it's an ongoing program, and sorry for a quick segue, because I'm going to completely put this plug out there for a River Safe Home program. It is a self-driven test that you do online, and it's a pledge. And so Rita, you probably took the test online. It's a pledge. It's actually a program facilitated through the Washtenaw County Water Resource Commissioner's Office. And it just asks a few questions to really give people an idea of, oh, I didn't realize that was something that was affecting water quality. Now, the River Safe Home program is obviously focused around water quality within the Huron River, because that's the focus of the Water Resource Commissioner's program. City of Ann Arbor residents get a credit on their stormwater bill for being a River Safe home. It's not much. I think it's like $1.40 maybe. And every 5 to 7 years, the residents at that address and ask them to take the quiz again. So Rita, if you
That's what I
haven't
didn't
gotten a
know.
request from us again, oh, yep, we absolutely do, because there's such a turnover because it's focused on not the bill payer or the rate payer.
Right.
But yes, I'm in talks right now with the county offices on incorporating it into the River Safe.
Right. So the only, well, there are two other things. One is I still am concerned about businesses and other landowners, landlords, et cetera, that use space, that use the kinds of things that are not integrated pest management. And it would be just really great to move forward with that if at all possible. And also today, this is like ongoing marketing. It's like we need the anti-marketing to the Mosquito Joe that I got in the mail today that is working on cutting down the itches in your yard. That I don't know what to do about that, but it's kind of, it's similar to Chemlon.
Yeah.
Ugh.
I've seen it. It's not what, it doesn't fit in with IPM at all, but I'm not even sure what the city could do about private business. Private
I know, it's just really disappointing to see it.
Yeah.
Okay, that's all. Thanks very much.
Okay. Chris, I believe you wanted a question. And then
Two things, Jennifer. You could bring trees into the discussion. I think what one does, I'm not a soil scientist, but what one does to nurture and sustain trees is exactly the opposite from a soil chemistry standpoint that one does to nurture and sustain turfgrass. Trees would like to have a fungal microorganism environment. Turfgrass would like to have a bacterial environment. The two don't go together. Do people want their trees or do they want their turfgrass? Do we in Ann Arbor want to have big, healthy, very old trees, or do we want to have grass and all the things that go with that? Many more natural or native organisms grow better in the fungal environment than in the bacterial environment. Secondly, there's hope. In the late 1960s, I began to see in my own property the arrival of Amur honeysuckle and from the Amur River Valley in China and buckthorn from the Caucasus Mountains in Europe explode in our fair town. When I started in business in 1980, no client of mine had any idea what those plants were in the back 40 or on their property lines. Today, we have the Natural Areas Program. We have widespread understanding of the impact of invasive exotic shrubs and herbaceous plants on our environment, and there are more and more of them. There's been an unbelievable sea change among the citizens of Ann Arbor on this subject and their awareness of it. I think there's hope. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Chris. Bob?
Yeah, Jen, thanks for all this. Just quickly, in addition to Rita's point about businesses, have you done any direct outreach to the university or the school district on asking them if they follow IPM practices, and if not, would they be willing to commit to that?
The school district and the university also have their very own stormwater permits. So they already are very familiar with what IPM is. Their grounds and maintenance people they are aware of IPM. It's not a requirement that they have to use IPM.
I mean, it might be worth, asking for a commitment from them. See that.
I meet with them on a monthly basis for drop the hint, very, very not subtly.
Thanks.
Sure.
Okay. Any other comments? Questions?
Councilmember Bannister has raised her hand.
Yeah, Rita. And Ann, I'm sorry. Ann and then Rita.
I think you all, I think I already got most of my questions answered. This report Jennifer, that you gave, this is in response to our February resolution to do, okay. So yes, the River Safe program joining with this is the certification program that we talked about in the resolution.
I'm sorry, could you repeat that? You broke up a bit. I'm sorry.
Yeah, my speaker's acting a little funny here, but well, in our resolution, we talked about a certification program, exploring a certification program. So the pledge that you're working on is that idea.
We're looking into how to successfully facilitate that with limited resources. Adding another layer of governance, adding another permit or whatever you want to call it, it will require additional. So we're looking for other opportunities to come up with some sort of, and pledge is a perfect word. So there's more of a internal promise, if you will, because we don't have the authority at this time to mandate private companies utilize IPM.
Okay.
Yeah, we're trying to work within the boundaries that we have.
Okay, yep, that sounds good. The resolution also called for identifying owners of turf grass property for the purpose of outreach education.
Mm-hmm. And that's why we started with the residential homeowners.
Okay, so that phase 2 then, or I think your slide had a phase 2 was coming.
Yes, and as I mentioned, we are working with our marketing consultant or consultant to determine what that phase 2 might look like. Based on what I'm hearing this evening, that kind of gives us some good guidance for what phase 2 may look like.
Yes, as I reread the resolution, identifying owners of turf grass property, I think that was Chris Graham's idea of getting at some of these big turf grass lawns and maybe doing a customized outreach to these owners of large turf grass property. I think that was what Chris, part of the intent on the resolution. Thank you.
Let's see. In the interest of time, I think we should move on. It's already 9:15, so thank you very much, Jen.
Thank you all.
Very good. It provoked a lot of good discussion. So thanks. Have a good evening. So I think the next item on the agenda is new business, which was a discussion about work group alignment with the 820 plan. I think this discussion could go on for a long time, and I would rather have it, personally, I would rather have it done within the working groups. And then over the next couple of weeks, and then let's work towards having something semi-presentable at the next commission meeting at the end of July. What do people think about that?
Steve, I have one question, and maybe Emily, you can comment on it, or possibly Galen. And that is, my understanding of Missy's presentation is that she's looking for input primarily on many of the things that she listed, not specifically that we work on something. In other words, staff is going to develop a straw man, provide that to the Environmental Commission, and the Environmental Commission, either as a commission or as a working group, will then give feedback on that straw man. Is that a correct understanding, or is the understanding that the working group and or the commission or subsets of the commission or commissioners leading Ad hoc working groups will develop straw men and bring those to the commission and to our city staff. That's one fundamental question that I have is what's the ask?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The latter, Mr. Mursky, I would think it's the latter. The latter ask, guys come together and, coming together with some ideas and whatnot. So I think that was the gist of what she was saying.
Mm-hmm.
Emily, do you have the same understanding?
Yeah, I'm not exactly clear. I mean, this is all like evolving in real time, right? So it's not like we had a conversation about this beforehand necessarily. So I think it's open to influence about how it'll go.
Okay.
I don't think anything's set.
Okay.
I would just add one comment, and that's the last thing that I have to say on this, and that is that if someone has something that they're really passionate about and that they're willing to pull together one of these working groups or a different working group or something else and lead it together with resident or local volunteers, I'd like to hear who's willing to step up and do that. Otherwise, I think it falls back to the working groups that we have and the commission and doing things within those, let's say, those boundaries. But to me, things will get done if someone says, I will be responsible and accountable for pulling a group together to do X.
Mm-hmm. Any other comments? Okay. Shannon.
I guess I am interested, to be perfectly frank, I think the water group has struggled with sort of what to attach to. And there's been lots of different reasons for that. I think in reshuffling in some ways. And one of the things that I'm interested in is part of this code stuff. And that's, I think, more my world, maybe not necessarily everybody else's world. And so I would be interested in taking that on and linking up to the Ordinance Review Committee to think about opportunities for the codes that could be reworked, potential codes that could be reworked to be able to support the 820 initiative. So I don't know if anybody else is interested in that, because again, I kind of work on both sides of it. I put things in front of people in terms of going through the city process. And so I'm aware of all the ordinances and codes that we have to come up against and figure out how to work around. And that's not necessarily everybody's gig. I know.
Mm-hmm.
But I feel like it's something that is important too. And that I would like to see I'd like to take that one on to think about identifying where those opportunities are and which might be most important to start thinking about changing so that we can support this goal that we have. Mm-hmm. So I'm less interested in going back to the water group, Stephen, and more interested in kind of taking a detour into something else. So that's me. So I don't know if this is getting into so it doesn't quite fit with the format you were suggesting for me particularly, but I don't know if other people have other ideas. So.
Yeah. Okay. So let me just weigh in here a little bit. I see our major work product or tangible work products that are resolutions to city council and helping draft ordinances that the city staff does not have and council do not have the time and the bandwidth right now to do. We can do a lot of that scut work. And to me, I think it's important to focus on goals rather than processes. I mean, a lot of what Missy has brought up are basically invitations to a process. But I think what we need to do is distill all that down to goals. And then we all individually need to take on a goal and take responsibility for it. Now, I had been going actually in an opposite direction and not suggesting that we consolidate work groups, but actually splitting up work groups, but that the work groups be oriented to goals. And I want to remind everybody that our bylaws suggest that we only need to have one commissioner on each working group. And we can assemble whatever expertise we're aware of or we need. We can help each other with our goals. And I think that's something I think that's more workable. And so I'd already thought about this with the solid waste working group, and there's 3 volunteers within the solid waste working group that we're going to focus their attention on the 3 goals that we agreed on at the beginning of the year. And I've already reached out to other members of the community to see if they would want to participate in that. So to me, that's a much more productive model, than being oriented just on processes and working more diffusely. We need to have a prioritized goal list and just check them off one by one. So when I mentioned that discussions within working groups, my idea was that that this is the proper way to do it online, and to actually maneuver, our organization to better address the 820 goals. I was thinking that it would probably be good to have those sorts of discussions within the working groups based on their current kind of purview, like the solid waste. And what I could see is that there's a lot of overlap between the natural features and the pollinators work group. So if the leaders of those groups could get together and parse out what they want, and just get people to commit to certain goals and figure out what their goals are, what a good manageable goals are. And this doesn't mean one big goal that takes 2 years, but I think it's useful to have a mixture of goals that are relatively short term and relatively long term. And then we should think about sorting out all these goals by long-term and proportionate effort required, and when the deadline, when they need to be accomplished. So they're all SMART goals. So that's my thinking about this. I mean, in a large group like this, it might be, we could be discussing this till midnight and maybe compete with city council. I know that that's not viable. So that was why I brought up the working group. And I think we can all have discussions within those working group frameworks as they currently exist to try to develop goals and pick through these suggestions with Missy and, revisit our goals and come up with a plan within those groups, and then be in the position to present them to the full commission at the July meeting. Okay, and then people who are already committed to certain goals that we've had that are ongoing, there's no reason why they can't continue that work in the meantime. Does that make any sense? And one of the things I have is I've been taking down action points. So one of the things that's not really on the agenda, but I've taken down action points, and so I'm going to, as part of the chair report, I'm just going to review those. And I'm going to ask for, some, that they be official action points, and we will review those at the next meeting as well. Okay. I mean, I don't know of another way to organize something like this quickly and efficiently. John?
Do we have leaders of, I mean, you're the leading, I think, the solid waste group. I think Carrie is leading the pollinator group. Do we have any other quote unquote working group leaders that are officially recognized within the Environmental Commission? I'm not aware of any others. I think Susan was leading Watershed, but I think she's gone.
Yeah, Susan's gone, but I think Bob has taken on that responsibility for now. Is that correct, Bob?
Yeah, I'm happy to do that if we're going to continue with that structure.
So my instinct is to go from the bottom up. So I would like everybody to just send me what their personal thoughts are. I'd like people to hash it out within the working groups, and then I would like the heads of the working groups to hash it out once the working groups have something they would like to share that they've digested and processed a bit. John?
I would encourage, when that's done in the working groups, that everybody refer back to Missy's inputs and as potential guidance for what are the kinds of things that at least she and the staff feel are things that working groups can make a significant contribution on.
Yeah, that's my action point that I'll talk about later. So I'll connect up with Missy.
If I can just say something really quick, I did send you a file today that has everything that Missy was talking about pulled from the slideshow. So it's just a 2-page document. So that might be really useful for you to refer to.
No, that's good. I'm going to share that with everybody and just send an email that might summarize this, okay, after the meeting. Any other comments? Suggestions? Okay, well, let's move on to the next item on the agenda are the reports from committees, other commissions, council, and chair. So committees. The Solid Waste Committee has not met since March. I do not have a report. The Water Quality Work Group.
The last meeting of that group was the one that you were at and I was not. I did ask former Commissioner Hutton for a status update and I have not heard back from her, but I think the thing that was closest to reaching the commission was the proposal for a floodplain ordinance that was going to take the form of a zoning overlay district. And last I knew that was headed to planning for reaction, I think. So maybe Shannon could update us on that. But that's about all I know. I'll try to reconvene the group within the next couple of weeks here and do as you suggest, Steve.
Oh, okay. Okay, well, thanks, Bob. Yeah, I was at that. Shannon and I were at that meeting, I believe. And, and Jerry Hancock was the staff contact. Okay. So, and then now there's the Natural Features Working Group. And, and the Pollinators Working Group. So, as I mentioned before, I think they should get together and decide how they're going to carve up, the natural features, landscape, and maybe help with the water quality, because there's an impact on water quality as well. So I'm going to try to integrate all this information a week before our next commission meeting. And I'll work with Missy on that. Okay. Did that address your concerns, John? Okay. So, so are there any reports from the working group for pollinators?
We've been working on getting some feedback from staff on what's been going on with the integrative pest management program and education. So tonight's presentation was very, very helpful for us.
Okay, great. So Chris, the Natural Features Working Group?
We're making progress on 2 ordinance suggestions. The first being devising a new natural feature category called heritage trees, which would be trees typically larger than our current landmark tree list, and would be more because of doing that, it would be a more comprehensive list of trees in Ann Arbor. We expect that particular ordinance suggestion to go through really relatively easily. It would fundamentally increase the mitigation requirements for taking heritage trees, larger trees, in a site development process. We're dovetailing that with language that builds on those changes to universally protect landmark and heritage trees across the city. That is to say, most likely there would be a permit process devised, and on exactly what basis, it's not clear yet, but some sort of permit process would be designed and put into place before the ordinance would go to council that would require the involvement of the city if someone wanted to heavily prune or remove a heritage or landmark tree on any property, on all properties. This is a heavier lift, and was tried 20 years ago in the city and was fatally shot down. We know a lot more. We are much more informed about trees than we were 20 years ago. And it's a different thing when you talk about landmark trees, which have some size and importance, and definitely a different thing when you talk about heritage trees, which are significant elements in the landscape on the whole. So we're making progress. I'm going to put Shannon on the Natural Features Committee so she can see our language and contribute to it now rather than later. And unfortunately, I can't lead the meeting tomorrow and have sort of dropped dead the last month or so because of my work, which is way behind this year. But we will keep our oars in the water and we will keep moving. And you'll see some action this fall, I think.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Chris. So we'll move on to other commission reports. How about Energy Commission?
So a couple of things from the Energy Commission. First of all, Shoshana Lenski, who is the commission chair, resigned effective the end of May. I'm acting as chair, given that I was the vice chair. Our first meeting is going to be on July 14th. That'll be our first meeting since early March. Since then, or in between, I should say, there's two things that have still continued to move on. One is the lighting ordinance, which has been reviewed with the Planning Commission, and with staff is working on final recommendations to the ordinance to the Planning Commission for their approval. I don't know exactly when those are due, but I assume it's within maybe the month or so, because there's been some exchanges back and forth and they're nearly final. We also, that same group had some input on the sign ordinance. The other thing is the EV charging ordinance. During the pandemic, I think most of you know that Planning Commission has continued to meet, and the charging ordinance working group met in a working session with the Planning Commission, and we have our first formal meeting with the entire Planning Commission in a public session on the 7th of July. So both of those are moving well. Basically, both ordinances are essentially done or nearly done. And then just maybe the last thing of note, we too will be getting 2 new youth commissioners. And one of those has already been nominated by the mayor. We hope to provide some input for the other open position. And then there's an open position, obviously vacated by Chair Lenski. So we will have 3 new commissioners here soon. Other than that, I think really there's not much more to report on.
Okay, thanks, John. Shannon, planning?
Yeah, we had the floodplain ordinance come through and took a look at that. And things seem in pretty good shape for that, actually. So it seems, I think that'll keep moving through the system. And as well as, John's right, it's like the lighting and the sign are super close, as well as the EV one. There were just like minor comments, and some of those have really been through the ringer. The lighting one in particular has really gone through a lot of evolution. I guess the only other thing I would say is of note is that I think with the whole A20 effort, there has been more of a platform for Planning Commission to ask for things when petitioners are outside of the kind of by right development. And so I think that there's been a kind of a higher, I think people are just willing to ask for more because we have this framework. And so it's really helping, I think. It's not just kind of a vague, like, don't you care about the climate? It's like, we have these goals. And so I think that it really is helping us feel like there's a firm platform on which to stand for these times when we do have wiggle room to be able to ask developers to be able to give back in ways. So I think it's happening. So it's exciting to be able to see that evolving. And not every project, has that opportunity, but some of them do. And so I think that it's been exciting to be able to see that happening. So I think that all these things are making a difference, I'd say.
Great. Okay. Mike isn't here, so we'll forget about parks. So that moves on to council, report from council.
Chip's couldn't let me go first. I want to hear what Chip's update too, but I mean, as you know, on June 1st, council unanimous in moving forward on our 820 carbon neutrality plan. And as I mentioned, that's a silly announcement for you guys, but also I mentioned earlier that Chip and I worked together on the putting to you all, the voter, to decide in November on the ballot about the new sidewalk millage. And I think that will help with strategy for of lowering vehicular miles by 50%. So if we can, we had a series of long and complicated sidewalk projects, and part of those were that there's trees and snow removal issues, but one of the hugest issues was special assessments. The 5-figure special assessments. So I think that'll be good. I hope the voter there will approve a sidewalk millage so that we can improve our non-motorized transportation and move forward on our carbon neutrality without having to burden individual homeowners excessively.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, thanks, Ann. Chip?
I think Ann covered what we've been talking about. Obviously, the last month, our focus has been elsewhere, but I think she did a good job of reporting back where they are. I think, I'm eager to hear from Councilmember Bannister and Councilmember Eaton how their meeting goes tomorrow. I think, one of the things that we do need to move forward on is either adopting the solid waste plan or suggesting modifications to it and accepting that as a document. I think that is now our lack of movement on that has now become a constraint to how we effectively move forward. I think there's a lot to be hashed out, and I thank my colleague for taking the lead on that. Hopefully that'll be something that comes up, by August, and that we can address that by then. But I think outside of that, Ann did a great job of summing up what we've been doing since this group last came together.
Okay. John?
Very quickly, I'd like to echo Chip's last statement, and that is, if council finds fault in the shrimp, if indeed it agrees that it makes sense to have a strategic 5-year plan, that council say, these are the omissions, the key omissions that we think need to be addressed, or these are the elements that we disagree with, but not simply to say, we're not going to act on it or we don't like it. But we need to be specific so that staff and those who are willing to work with staff can develop a plan if indeed one is agreed to be, that is agreed that we need it.
Yeah, has staff provided a list of the sticking points? No. Okay.
I don't think staff knows. I mean, that's what I assume. I think the sticking points are with council as a whole or individuals on council, and that's where council needs to come back to staff and say, these are the sticking points, and this is what you need to work on to move it forward.
Okay.
You know, I think the sticking point is very clear. It's both in, you know, the debate about, you know, dividing things up by stream or by segment, market segment, is one. The other is in, you know, the technicalities of how you contract these services. I think those are the two major sticking points. I mean, Anne, would you agree with that, or could you add to that at all?
No, that seems to be, I think maybe Recycle Ann Arbor is sort of at the center of this too. Is that what the sticking point is that we don't want, oh, we'll have to see if the staff in-house figure that someone asked for, I think Chip was asking for the in-house staff figure versus the Recycle Ann Arbor figure for the recycle piece.
Yeah, I think ultimately, you know, if we're not going to realize the savings that the shrimp has projected, then there's little reason to accept that part of it. Yeah, you know, and I think, you know, we're clearly on track to get some numbers back and have, you know, some guidance on that. But that to me seems like the major point of contention in all of this, because, you know, all of the programmatic changes that have been recommended in there are contingent upon realizing these savings of changing how this collection occurs. So, you know, I think that there are a lot of people who are very skeptical of it, and I count myself in that group. But, you know, we'll see what happens when they open these different proposals or different bids, and see what those are. And I think, you know, part of it is council has to make some value decisions. Is, you know, do we value the use of union labor? Do we value locally based companies doing this? What are we willing to, you know, there's a cost of all of those things, and how do you figure that out? And I think council has to evaluate that and then either provide very clear direction as to change this, and this, or, you know, accept the plan and move on.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah. Any other comments or questions? Okay. So let's move on to the chair's report. I have a few things on my plate here. One is the youth commissioners. We've been, you know, we were council approved the appointment of youth commissioners. We had 14 applicants. There was some question for a while about what the actual review process might be. I thought it might be important to have actual conversations with all the applicants. So, and I'm committed personally to getting them all engaged in some capacity or another. The ones that are not appointed as youth commissioners to the Environmental Commission, there's other opportunities. For example, as city interns, there's opportunities within the commission working groups, and there's opportunities within the local NGOs. So I've been having half an hour, 1 hour conversations with as many of them that return my calls to try to, and I'm dedicated to placing them, you know, wherever they'll be happy and they can contribute to the community. So out of the 14 applicants, only 8 of them responded to my emails, my phone call, voicemail messages, and my text messages. So out of those 8, all of them are eminently qualified. But I personally suggested 2 of them based on, I think, how they might be able to fill out, based on their experience and background, and how they might be able to fill out the commission's tasks. I thought it was important to select one person who was older. You know, that would mean somebody who was an upperclassman, undergraduate, or under 25, and then also a younger person, somebody in the high school. And so we would have a bridging mentor for them. And so I passed those recommendations on, and so we'll see what council decides, whether our council members decide. As a follow-up, I contacted Eileen Spring at Food Gatherers. The ball is in her court. She agrees that she needs to, she doesn't have the time to do the things that are necessary because of the COVID emergency. Food Gatherers has lost half of their volunteers over the last 3 months, and they've also lost most of their donations. So now they have to purchase food to distribute. So I think this is something that we could perhaps call for volunteers to go with to contact Food Gatherers and help them out. And then the last thing I have to say is I'm sorry to see Emily leaving. I know she's going on to other opportunities, and this will be her last session with us. Our staff liaison is passing on to Galen Hardy, who is present here, and congratulations, Galen. And I look forward to working with him going forward. And I want to note that Emily's having an online exit party on June 30th. So I would encourage people to join that. I'm signed up for it myself. So that's all I have to say for the chair report. So the next thing is the report from staff.
Thank you, Emily.
You guys are so welcome. I was just gonna say, I mean, you just basically took my thunder. The staff report is, yeah, I'm moving to Connecticut to be closer to my side of the family. And it's a move we've wanted to make for a long time. So my wife was able to get a job in New Haven. It's a dream job, and we're probably going to be moving late July, early August. So I just wanted to thank you from the bottom of my heart that it's been fantastic working with each of you. You're more effective than I think you are. I'll just leave it with that. And I just wanted to introduce Galen. I don't know if you want to just say a few words about yourself. He's a fabulous colleague, and you guys are going to be in great hands. Galen?
Thank you for that awesome welcome, Emily. Definitely going to miss you. It's a pleasure to meet everybody. I've met some of you before in other venues, but I'm looking forward to working with everybody. Right now, I'm the community engagement specialist for the Office of Sustainability, as well as I'm a Eastern Michigan grad, Oakland University grad, and well, I ain't gonna say former, but once a Marine, always a Marine, and I'm honorably discharged Marine Corps vet. So look forward to meeting with everybody and just learning and continue to push that envelope. Definitely.
Glad to have you.
Yeah,
glad to be here. Thank you.
Okay, is that it, Emily? Okay. So the next item is items for the next agenda. Do I have any suggestions? Okay, I think it'll develop over the next month. And like I said, I think we could almost devote the entire 2 hours, to a discussion about goals and, and action points, people responsible and action points. Okay.
Steve, to that point, would it make sense that be then a working session as opposed to a formal meeting? It might give us a little bit more flexibility to have that kind of give and take and dialogue than something where, it's more formal. I mean, that's up to you and Galen, but maybe others might have. I just wanted to throw that out there.
And the big difference, I think, between having a working session and having a regular commission meeting is that working sessions are typically not televised. So that's your major difference.
Mm-hmm. Okay. No, that's a good suggestion. I think maybe, and it's also less structured. So in a way, it's more amenable to a discussion, a general discussion. Okay. So I'm happy to take that on. Emily, what's required to make it a work session instead of an official meeting?
I think the meeting needs to be noticed that way. So that's just a legal thing that I can work with, or actually Galen can work with Kelly Beatty, our fantastic commissions chair, to do.
Can we really do a working session virtually? I mean, under the Open Meetings Act, I would think you'd have to have television present and public participation available.
That's a good point. We'll figure it out.
All right.
Yeah,
I mean,
our working sessions for planning commission have actually been via screen. I'm not sure if it's broadcast in the same way, but the interface feels very much the same, but it's less structured in terms of getting called on and, you know, things like that. So.
Mhm. Yeah, I'm comfortable with either. But I think we'll need, I think 2 hours is pretty much required to go through this whole discussion and to have all the committee reports, the reports from staff and things like that added onto the agenda, I think are a significant, maybe a significant issue.
And actually, to that point, you wouldn't necessarily have to do all of that. So you can leave off reports from committees and chair and all that stuff. You can leave off, you wouldn't be adopting minutes. So a lot of the sort of more boilerplate things that you do every meeting, you wouldn't necessarily need to do as in a working session.
Okay. Well, why don't we have a working session? I think that would be a good, yeah, I think that would be a good thing. Okay. So the next meeting would be scheduled for July 23rd. Okay. And we'll have a working session on July 23rd at the usual time from 7 to 9. Okay. So the next item on the agenda is public commentary. I'm going to read my statement again. This is an opportunity for persons to speak up for up to 3 minutes. Please call 1-888-788-0099 and enter meeting ID 92457969823. This information is also displayed on the meeting agenda and video feed. City staff will collect callers that have raised their hand one by one using the last 3 digits of your phone number. In order to electronically raise your hand to indicate your desire to speak, please press *9 on your phone. You will hear an automated announcement that the host is allowing you to speak. When speaking, please move to a quiet area and mute any television or background sounds so that we may hear you clearly. Please state your name and address at the beginning of your comments. And please be patient. There is a delay of up to 30 seconds before the connection is established. Emily, do you hear any public comments? I guess we should wait 30 seconds just to see.
Yeah, and I don't see anybody, but let's give it a couple seconds.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I think that's enough time. So do I have a motion to adjourn the meeting? Do I have John Mursky? Do I have a second? Shannon? All who are in favor of adjournment, raise your hands. All opposed? Okay, it passes unanimously. All right, thank you, everybody. I'm going to try to get this meeting. The meeting is adjourned. Thank you.